If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 126, Chapter 122. The new academic session had started, which meant Tristan and Malia were now juniors, promoted from the sophomore they had been months prior. The halls were crowded with excited students, all in vibrant colors and wide smiles as they reconnected with friends who traveled for the holidays. Tristan likely foresaw this, which was why he pulled up late to the driveway, not too intrigued by the idea of pushing through the early crowds of hyper-teens. Whoa! It's like it gets worse with every passing session. Malia exclaimed as they witnessed how the whole place from the parking lots to the free spaces around the school building was filled to the brim with students. Maybe we should have arrived earlier. You think? Using Tristan as a battering ram, they pushed their way through the sea of students to enter the building, and even then they still had to maneuver their way through the endless flow of students. Does Beacon Hills have this many students? Even if she did ask, who could answer her? Checking his phone, Tristan read the email sent to the entire student body and noted that their timetable had been changed and crossed his with Malia's to know which class they had together. At least that's one good thing for today. They had a lot of classes together, which was the best thing Tristan has heard in the past few days. I'm meeting up with Allison before classes. Are you coming with? Malia asked after Tristan located their new class, but he shook his head. I'll meet you guys in class, he said, and went ahead with picking a seat in the middle of the classroom that was still empty despite them arriving late. He was joined by a few of his former classmates moments after he took his seat, but he didn't bother with a perfunctory greeting and just laid his head on the desk and muted everything outside until whenever classes started. For some reason, he had a feeling that this would be his worst semester so far. Which was saying something, since none of them could be classified good. Well, this was his third semester, so third time's the charm? Would it even be a good charm or bad charm? He wondered. He heard some voices calling his name, but he ignored them in favor of enjoying this short moment of reprieve before all the chaos started. And a very short moment it was. His phone vibrating alerted him of a new notification, so he was forced to pull his head off the desk as he sat straight and opened the new message. A poem. Hey! Turns out he wasn't the only one who got the notification, but before any of them could say anything concerning it, the classroom's door slid open as their English teacher came in. The offing was barred by a black bank of clouds, and the tranquil waterway, leading to the uttermost ends of the earth, flowed somber under an overcast sky, seemed to lead into the heart of an immense darkness. This is the last line to the first book we are going to read. It is also the last text you will receive in this class. Phones off, everyone, their new English female teacher said as she stepped into the classroom and successfully captured the attention of the whole class. She wrote her name on whiteboard, Jennifer Blake, and gave a brief personal introduction before kick-starting the class with a few minutes of revising their last semester syllabus before introducing the new one. It was until she finished her introduction that Tristan finally took note of where he was sitting down and the people around him. The three girls in front of him, Greenberg to his left side with Stiles and McCall behind him. Boyd's in another class, he idly noted after a quick surveying glance and focused back on the lecture. Unsurprisingly, English was a very boring subject, so Tristan soon found himself zoning out. On the first day, he could tell that Ms. Blake had a way with words, as even he found himself tuning in every now and then to her lectures with the rest of the class. Unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be, as he gave up and chose to stare at the sky outside the window instead and just let himself get lost in it. Mr. Hayes! Mr. Hayes! His immersion was forcefully cut short as a stalk of chalk hit the side of his head and made him turn to look at the English teacher's unamused glare. This is the first day of resumption, Mr. Hayes, and you're already reminiscing. Were the holidays that memorable? Her stern eyes bore holes into Tristan with the bubbling smell of her rising anger as he continued remaining silent. He was about to apologize to Ms. Blake, but his head suddenly snapped to the window and he abruptly stood up from his seat, drawing the full attention of the class. Hello, Mr. Hayes? Is something wrong, or do I have to report you to the principal's office on the first day? He heard his teacher caking out to him, but he ignored whatever it was she was saying and started slowly walking to the window panels. His actions drew the curiosity of his fellow classmates, and some stood up with him to look outside the class for whatever had caught his attention. With his higher visual and auditory acuity, he easily noticed the black smudge and grating sounds in the sky that was quickly expanding in their direction. As it got progressively closer, others started taking note of it too. Take your seats. What is that? The teacher mumbled in shock upon seeing the large flock of crows that seemed to cover the sky coming their way. Get down. No one knew who said it, but they all reacted instantly and took cover below their desks as the rain of crows smashed themselves brutally against the windows. Being one of the closest ones to the windows, though late, his reaction was quick as he blurred towards where Malia, Allison, and Lydia sat. He grabbed 2 desks and joined them as an improvised blockade in a split second and huddled with them behind it. Shrieking screams and cries echoed throughout the classroom as the crows broke through the glass and crashed into the classroom, ramming into anything that barred their trajectory, painting the once peaceful classroom into a picture of gore with dead crows, broken glass, splattered blood everywhere and black feathers floating around. The gory barrage continued for over a minute until the entire classroom and its students were covered in a bit of everything, bird parts, injuries, blood, and feathers, before it finally stopped. No one told them before they ran out of the classroom after making sure that no second salvo of suicidal crows were in sight. The authorities were called and all the students were subjected to a checkup for injuries or any signs of trauma. Allison and Lydia were able to pull themselves together quickly, so other than a few scratches, they appeared mostly fine. Another casual Monday for them at this point. What the hell was that back there? Lydia held herself from shouting, but anyone could clearly see from distraught she was from the way her voice quivered as she spoke. She looked at Malia and Allison for answers if they had any, but the two of them just directed the same look to Tristan, who currently held one of the crows and was staring intently at it. The crow had broken both of its wings as well as one of its legs, but was still surprisingly alive, but not for long it seemed. Tristan was trying to read the crow's emotions, but he wasn't getting anything. Not one spiking emotion could be felt, not even the fear he thought the crow would have basked itself in. Erg, Lydia grunted with crawling disgust at the sight of the bloody crow in Tristan's hands. He's not going to eat it or drink its blood, right? Or else I think I might have to throw up. Trist! Malia called out to him upon seeing the creeping frown on his face. Tristan sighed in defeat and dumped the crow's corpse inside a nearby bin before turning to his audience. I couldn't get anything from it. Not one thing. As far as I'm concerned, those crows are as comfortable as can be and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong from its point of view. Hey! There's nothing wrong with those crows, emotionally speaking at least. He added. Wait. Lydia held out her hand with a humorless smile on her face. You mean to say a joint kamikaze attack from a million crows is, what? Normal in crow speak? Tristan shrugged, not knowing what else to think about of the latest wonders of Beacon Hills. That's all I could get from it, he said. Allison sighed heavily, finding it hard to settle on the most appropriate mood in the current scenario. First day of school and this is what we get? I don't even know if I should react scared or shrug it off with nonchalance. So, no one wants to ask why an army of crows decided to attack the school, our class in particular. Malia asked and they all paused, thought of it, then slumped their shoulders with varying sighs as they couldn't make heads or tails of anything crow-related at all. Chapter 127, Chapter 123. A lot of free periods were given because of the recent crow attack and the large number of injured students, injuries which varied from simple scratches to having an entire crow's beak in your stomach. The crows were being cleared off by the authorities who arrived, as well as having that entire wing cordoned off. Though the attack was for some reason mainly focused on Tristan's classroom, classrooms below and above them, labs and offices with windows in the same line suffered the crow's danger dash to lesser degrees when compared to the downpour in Tristan's class. Some of the students were taken to the hospital while some went to the school's infirmary depending on how hurt they were. On the other hand, a big handful of them were prescribed therapeutic sessions for any budding trauma, possibly bird-related. The nagging feeling Tristan got when he got nothing from the crows almost set him off in a paranoid fit, but Malia quickly calmed him down. The only thing I can think of is that they were brainwashed, Malia said as they sat together in the library. Brainwashed? Allison asked with a healthy doubtful look level at Malia. Who would want to brainwash hundreds of crows for a suicide attack? Whoever brainwashed them, Malia remarked with an obvious eye roll. It's never one thing with Beacon Hills. First an alpha pack, now the Suicide Squad, Crow Deluxe Edition. I don't know about all that, but I think what you said about them targeting our class holds some merit. Tristan suddenly said after remaining silent for a while. Maybe I caused it. They all turned to look at Lydia, wondering what she might have meant by those words. Do you know that crows symbolizes death or an impending darkness? I am a banshee, the woman who forewarns death. I don't think it's too much of a coincidence. Lydia sounded skittish as the very thought of her being the cause of what had happened disgusting and terrifying her to almost traumatic degrees. Her words made sense as they knew little to nothing when it came to Lydia being a banshee, or the abilities that came with her being one. They knew more about Tristan being a vampire than they did about Lydia being a banshee. As far as Tristan knew, Lydia's precognitive abilities were the basic abilities of being a banshee, similar to a werewolf's strength and healing factors. We can't really deny that, but I don't really think so. Still, we'll put it down as a possible cause. Tristan complied, having no reason not to. Do you have any particular reason for saying that? You were the first one to notice the crows before they even became visible. What's up with that? Allison remembered how focused Tristan had been on the windows through most of the class, way before the teacher had called him out. Tristan closed the book in front of him and opened up another subject topic. Honestly, I have no idea. I had this really weird encounter with a crow a few days ago and now this. That's why I don't think it's Lydia's handiwork. When was that? You never told me anything about it. Malia asked, curious about this encounter he never mentioned. How weird are we talking about here? Tristan calmly flipped through the pages of the book in front of him as he recounted what happened that day. It was the day after Allison came back and I had likely forgotten about it, that's why I never told you. As for how weird it was, well, this crow was basically copying everything I did, or maybe I was the one copying it, whatever it was, we were basically doing the same thing at the same time, down to the last microsecond. Almost as if I was seeing a mirror reflection of myself, except in a crow form. What? The girls had pale faces as they heard what was basically a horror retelling with ultra-realism. What happened? T to the crow. Tristan didn't understand their overrated reactions, especially in Malia's case. It flew away to join its flock after it got startled. What more could they say? Just the thought of you being alone and seeing a crow who perfectly reflects your actions in the middle of the forest was a very scary thought that would have scared them out of their minds if they had been in that situation. Anyway, it doesn't matter. No need to keep pondering on things we have no understanding of. Tristan suggested, but they were too deep in their thoughts to hear what he said. Tristan said nothing else as he felt a familiar presence coming towards them, and soon enough, his only male friend appeared and took the empty seat present. What's got you in a fit? Malia asked the huge teen who was clearly plagued by some heavy thoughts. I don't want to sound like the whining guy with an obsessed crush, but I think something is wrong with Erica. He subtly noted all their expressions as he spoke. Out of all of them, only Lydia reacted somewhat, but he didn't know what it meant. Tristan was the only one who didn't bother paying attention to Boyd's plight despite calling the other his only friend. He just focused on some pleasure reading while Boyd explained the basis of his worries. Right. And I also called Isaac and he said Erica was visiting some relatives or something like that. And now Isaac is absent from school, even though the three made plans for the day. During practice he didn't even send a text or call. But I did, and guess what? He's not picking up since yesterday. With how many of their schoolmates had died since the year began, Boyd was naturally anxious, as the last thing he wanted to see or hear was that Erica, and now Isaac, was mauled to death in the wild by some unidentifiable animal. You haven't been able to reach Isaac? Tristan suddenly raised his head and asked, to which Boyd nodded. Right now I'm worried as fuck, and no, whatever the fuck that was that happened in your class with the crows isn't making me worry less. That shit looks like whatever they classify as black magic or witch voodoo. Did you ask McCall if he knew anything about Isaac's whereabouts? Boyd shook his head. I haven't seen Scott since I arrived. He was in your class, not mine. Malia gave Boyd 2 hard slaps to his back to drive away the depressing thoughts. Meanwhile the muscular teen wondered just where her crazy strength came from. You worry too much, Boyd. Tristan said, but Boyd rolled his eyes and snorted. Yeah, it's something normal people do. Not sure if you've ever heard of it though. I have, but I make it a point not to be obvious when I worry. Tristan smoothly countered Boyd's sarcasm as he went back to his book. Okay, that's it. Enough about crows and animal attacks and conspiracy theories. How about talking about something important and down to earth? Lydia interjected before the 2 boys descended into a tirade of back and forth. Like what? Allison asked. Oh, I know. How about the new hot students? She excitedly suggested, which forced a groan out of Boyd. There's quite a lot of new intakes, even the hot ones. Is there any reason to talk about hot boys? Surprisingly, it was Malia who joined in the conversation, and Allison's reply made known the reason for Lydia's excitement. I think she means a particular leather jacket, biker twins. The straight one at least. Biker twins? Cute scrunched nose and an annoying smirk. Malia dug further, wondering if they were the same twins she and Tristan saw almost a week ago, which Lydia pretty much confirmed with her words that followed. Annoying? I think you mean confident smirk. Have you met them? Lydia's correction gained an eye roll from Malia. Probably the same pair we saw almost a week ago at that ice cream spot Allison showed me. Leaving the girls to whatever they deemed an interesting topic, Boyd closed the book Tristan was reading and pulled the slow teen up and dragged him off to training. On their way to the boys' locker room, Tristan sensed someone's focused gaze on him and he turned to the direction he sensed it, and at the root of it were the loud twins he and Malia met a while ago. It was also a bit weird how they were smiling at him as he caught their eyes before they walked away. Tristan sighed, almost wanting to curse his luck. While he didn't smell anything unique from them, what he felt on the other hand was different. When they smirked at him, he was pretty sure one of them subconsciously growled, and when he tried pressuring them on a whim with his eyes, it actually bounced off them, basically them shrugging it off, and sent an instantaneous spike of danger through his body. He had no idea who they were, never once entertaining the thought of them being alphas given how young they were, a year or two younger than him, basically 14 or 15. Who would have expected a pair of 15-year-old twins to be alphas? Chapter 128, Chapter 124. Tristan Hayes POV. I just had to rule them off, didn't I? I mused internally, not quite knowing how to suitably react to the recent expose Malia had gotten from Lydia, who had gotten it from Styles, who in turn had been informed by Scott, who was notified by an hospitalized Isaac, that somehow got to me, that the twins were alphas, hence members of the elusive Alpha Pack. Honestly, what kind of jagged plot twist is this? I really want to know the person who thought that turning 15-year-old twins was a good idea. While I am the last person to talk against how young one was in comparison to their maturity slope, 15-year-old alphas was a very justified large line that I think has to be drawn. This also meant that they were probably between age 13 and 14 when they killed or most likely assisted in killing an alpha, or alphas since they are twins. My surprise is very well founded given that they are the youngest alpha I have seen, along with most people for that matter. It seems like they tried killing Isaac the night before school resumed, but someone somehow saved him and now he is stuck in Beacon Hills Memorial Hospital, a very bad place for a werewolf to be in. If they truly went after Isaac to kill him, that means that they'll probably try again while he's still in the hospital. Isaac's only hope of survival at this point is Derek, and only in the event that he ends up going against a single alpha. Satomi strongly forbade us from clashing with the Alpha Pack, which means the only time I can help is if I see Derek or maybe his beta on the verge of death. I reckon the twins are here to keep an eye on us, the two members of the Buddhist pack, not just McCall. The surveillance might also extend to Allison and Lydia depending on what they know about them. Thankfully, I don't have to do anything. I don't want to imagine what it would feel like fighting against a pack of alphas, regardless of how excited my blood bubbles at the mere idea of it. But for some reason, despite the very presence of the Alpha Pack acting as an attention billboard and drawing everyone's focus in, I can't help but feel that something else is going on. My only proof of that is what I felt on the night Erica was kidnapped, which I still can't make heads or tails of till now, and the bizarre event with the crows. For some reason I'm still elusive to, I have this unexplainable understanding with crows, a connection I still haven't put much thought into exploring. How cool would it be if I turned into a swarm of crows instead of bats? My deal with crows is definitely a vampire thing, but for what reason, that I have not the slightest idea of. The rest of the day was pretty tense, and the initial excitement the students had upon coming back to school had all but died down after the crows. I think the principal is trying to push for a transfer. I think all the stories and the weird things he's seen happening inside the school were all heavy reasons to plead for transfer. The most recent one with the crows this morning just made that decision all the more easier to make. After practice under an always hyper coach, the school was forced to close very early, and I might have seen McCall and Styles speeding away in the latter's jeep towards the hospital. Looking at the twins, I saw them just smiling as they watched McCall leaving the school premises but did nothing about it. They turned around and one of them saw me and gave me a salute with a wide grin before they mounted their bikes and zoomed out in the opposite direction that Styles' jeep left in. I finally found a hot guy that isn't you, and it's just my luck that he turned out to be an alpha that's part of a possibly psychopathic and / or sociopathic alphas pack. This is not fair. The whining already told me who it was without me even trying to sense her presence. Hey Tristan, how about we hang out? I heard her say, but I just ignored her altogether, but then she started proving extra annoying when she followed me inside my car and sat in the passenger seat. What are you planning, Lydia? I asked and finally stared at her. If you think I'm following either of the twins or McCall, I'm not. I don't know who gave her the extra dopamine shot, but she was feeling a bit adventurous despite what happened in the morning. What I know is that I'm not about to board Lydia Martin's adventure cruise. Why not? Aren't you going to help Isaac? Or maybe follow the twins and see if they'll lead you to Erica? She curiously asked, seemingly confused by my inaction. Simple, orders. The current situation is a lot more delicate than you think it is. A little poke here and there and it's a franchise of revenge and death. So you're not helping? No. At least not until I have a good reason to. I told her plainly what was essentially a no. Mind stepping out now? I have dinner to cook. She folded her hands under her chest and gave me this look that I could make nothing out of. Sometimes I just don't get this girl, and that's saying something when I've spent years with someone like Malia stuck to my side. Then I'm coming over to your house, and before you ask, yes I can cook. I clasped my hands together and pleaded Lydia in a low voice. Can you please stop bothering me, Lydia? Your car is right there, drive it wherever you want to. She threw her hands up in exasperation as if she was the one who was feeling fed up. This is what I mean. You never talk to Allison this way. What is she going on about now? The thought of leaving her inside the car and going back on foot came to my mind, but I kept it as a last resort if I still can get her out. Probably because Allison knows better than to uselessly pester me every now and then. And unlike what you might think, I've talked to Allison with harsher words than you've ever been subjected to. Just what do you want from me, Lydia Martin? For a man of few to almost no words, something about the school and its people keeps making me have to say more than necessary because they just don't take a hint or won't understand until you stress it out. And now she's smiling. Will she still have that freely hanging smile on her face if she knows how close I am to drinking her blood to a dry husk? Just a claw to the throat and she's gone. Permanently. What do I want from Tristan Hayes? Just what is it that I might want from you? A rhetorical question neither she nor I had an answer to. Where's Malia when you need her? Malia is the best defense against people and situations like this. No longer putting much concern to whatever she might say, I kicked the car into ignition and started driving us home. My home. Surprisingly, she didn't say anything throughout the ride except a few reactions from her phone. My honest thoughts on Lydia Martin: I don't like her. I don't hate her. I find her annoying, exceedingly so. I find her sensible whenever the situation calls for it. She's weak-hearted. She's oddly determined. She's vain, greatly so. She's content with what she has, taking great pride in it. She's random. She's predictable. At the end of it all I'm left with is the Lydia Martin I get in the moment. I don't hate Lydia Martin, but I don't try to like her either. What are you cooking? She asked after stepping inside the house, with me heading to the kitchen to prep up a few things and see what I can make from what's available. Still deciding. Since Malia said she would be bringing Allison over, I had to make more food, and somehow Lydia helped to the point that it almost felt natural. Random question: how do people see me in general? Oh yeah, she started throwing out random questions and making me ask mine as we prepared the food. Beautiful. Popular. Can definitely bag her a few times with a good enough body and a nice face, as long as she's not going through a tantric phase. Interesting. Was all she said before asking another question, about me this time. Random question: how many friends do you have? Just 2. Allison and Boyd. I replied, and then asked one of mine. Random question: who is Lydia Martin? Chapter 129, Chapter 125. Beacon Hills Memorial Hospital. While Tristan was enjoying the benefits of Satomi's orders and was taking the time to see if he could at least understand the girl named Lydia Martin to some degree, Derek was already inside the hospital, trying his best to make sure that Isaac was safe. He hurriedly made his way through the white halls of the hospital, cursing how sterilized the air was with antiseptic in every inch of the damned place. Thankfully he already knew the room number where Isaac was being kept, so all he had to do was search for it, and search he did. Unfortunately, he wasn't the only one searching for Isaac. However, unlike him, the other group walked leisurely out of the elevator until the blind man leading them, Dukalion, stopped in the middle of the hall and started tapping a rhythm with his cane against the floor. The other two with him, Callie and Ennis, his alphas and longest-time comrades, stood behind him patiently as he peacefully tapped his rhythm away. Derek's heart was beating loudly against his chest the closer he got to Isaac, and as soon as he cut the second-to-last corner to get to his beta, his steps froze as he came across 3 people standing patiently in the middle of the hall, leisurely waiting for him. Derek cracked his neck, and then his shoulders, and stepped towards Dukalion and his alphas behind him. Well, Hello there, Derek. I believe this is as good a time as any to make a few things clear. Decalion spoke, his refined voice not betraying what lay beneath the blind elder's human skin. How about I gouge out your eyes instead before we have this little talk of ours, HMM? It went without saying that Derek was fully prepared to draw as much blood as needed to get to Isaac. Upon hearing Derek's words, the smile Decalion showed dimmed a bit. How rash, the young youths of today. Trust me, you'll have an easier time killing me than taking my eyes. Both of which are impossible tasks for you. Derek narrowed his eyes at Decalion, barely able to faintly smell the fragrance of his shirt, and at the two alphas behind him, easily recognizing from his childhood memories, especially Ennis, who was the perpetrator of the first great pain he had ever felt in his life. Ruor. He had no idea if they were stalling by having someone get to Isaac, and getting to his beta was his only priority. There was no place for a civilized talk between them until they returned Erica safe and sound. Impatient too. Maybe you watching your beta die as you helplessly watch on will make you more accepting of what I have to say. Decalion was not in the least bit bothered by Derek's transformation and just signaled his alphas, who immediately stepped in. Callie, go to the boy and finish up Ethan and Aiden's failure. I just wanted to speak with you today, Derek Hale, and introduce ourselves as well as our goals. But since you're not feeling particularly hospitable, how about we try this another time when you've had time to calm down? Derek and Ennis rushed at each other while Callie sauntered towards Isaac's ward to end the poor beta's life. As for Decalion, he turned around with slow and steady steps and walked towards the elevator he had come here in. However, when the elevator opened, Scott and Styles reflexively jumped back in shock at the smiling man in front of the elevator. If you will excuse me, he said, and stepped inside the elevator while Scott and Styles quickly dashed outside to maintain a certain proximity with Decalion. I'll be seeing you very soon, Scott McCall. With those words, the elevator closed and the two of them could finally focus on the ongoing fight between Derek and Ennis that would have been equally matched had it not been for Ennis' greater strength. Go to Isaac. The other one is still trying to kill him. Derek shouted as he brought Ennis to half his height by kicking in the back of his knees, before driving his elbows into his head, causing Ennis to rage out in pain. Seeing enough, Scott and Styles ran towards Isaac's ward and slammed open the door just in time to see Callie pull back the sheets to find an empty bed. Her beautiful face morphed into an utterly pissed one that just so happened to catch Styles and Scott forcefully barging into the room. All right, I'd admit we came in at the worst time possible, but you have to admit that blank face you pulled completely floored you. A mirite or what? Styles, run. Scott pulled Styles, who had been smiling silly at the furious Callie. You idiot. Why did you have to provoke her more? You remember she's an alpha, right? Oh. Styles realized all too late as he could hear something thrashing around and Callie's angry roar. It's not my fault, okay? How the hell is it not your fault? They were probably moments away from dying at the hands of an angry alpha. Scott couldn't keep the inner voices in. Styles shouted back his admissible defense. It's humor, Scott. It keeps me sane. Before Scott could say anything else, his eyes widened as he saw Styles being smashed against the wall and immediately losing consciousness with blood slowly coloring his face. His shift was instant, but it didn't mean a thing in front of Callie, who effortlessly picked him up and threw him against the ceiling before drawing him down and smashing him again the ground that the tiles cracked, and kicked his stomach, like a ball, with so much force that he traveled and hit the opposing wall. Where is Isaac Lahey? Tell me, or I'll kill this one. She stepped on Scott's head and pointed at the bleeding concussed Styles, who might just bleed to death if he wasn't medically attended to as quickly as possible. No. Scott gritted out as Callie kept pressing her heels against his skull. Last chance. Where is the beta? She asked again, her voice completely apathetic, showing Scott this was the last time she was asking. PP please, KN, ow. He pleaded for Styles despite how badly in pain his body was, but at least he was healing. Styles couldn't. Then I'm very sorry, little cub. Take it as a lesson if you might. She said as she removed her heels from Scott's head and walked towards Styles while Scott could do nothing but watched on as she neared Styles' body, not even daring to take a breath. How about you bully someone with a bigger gun? A woman's voice called out to Callie, forcing her to pause her action of picking Styles up. The mercenary. Callie's anger came back in full fold as she saw the woman who was responsible for Isaac surviving the twins' attack. Hello to you too, bitch. The dark-skinned woman in patient's garb replied, but before Callie could rush towards her, the woman gave way for someone behind her who cocked his gun and fired 2 quick bullets into Callie, who swiftly dodged the next 2 bullets Chris fired. "Callie!" Ennis shouted upon seeing Callie get shot, and despite the numerous slash wounds and purple splotches all over his body, a mutual destruction he and Derek suffered, he pushed Derek backwards and grabbed Callie and ran towards the elevator that opened on its own to show scared shitless Melissa McCall, who froze in shock at the split image her mind captured. Fortunately for her, Ennis had greater priorities and was also thankful for her presence that prevented the hunter from firing. He pushed her out just before the door closed into the blood-splattered hallway, but that wasn't what caught her focus. The werewolf form of Scott and Derek, especially Scott, was forever ingrained in her mind. ODT. She couldn't even say his name as a lump stuck to her throat as Scott stood upright to look at his mom, who was still in shock. He shifted back to his human form and tried approaching her, but she immediately jolted backwards, in reflex fear evident on her entire body. Though it hurt him to see her like this, more so when she recoiled in fear when he tried reaching her, he focused on what was more important. "Mom, please, Styles will bleed out to death if you don't help him." The others present, namely Chris, Derek and the mercenary, Brayden, sympathized with Scott trying to talk with his own mother. "Mom!" he shouted, which seemed to jolt her out of her frozen shock state. "Styles, please. He'll bleed out to death at this point, please." Yes, yet. Styles? Styles?" She was greatly alarmed as she finally understood how perilous his current state was. "Someone, enter one of these rooms and get me any tray with medical kits you see. Scott, come here and apply pressure exactly where and when I tell you to." Melissa shut out any outside distraction and unimportant thoughts as all her focus was on saving Styles, someone she saw as her own son, even temporarily forgetting about all the unexplainable things she saw, including Scott's monstrous looks. Right now she was just a senior nurse of the town hospital, and with everyone carrying out her orders expertly, she managed to stabilize Styles' condition before moving on to Brayden to stitch close her reopened wounds. Chapter 130, Chapter 126. While Tristan went home with Lydia in tow and ended up having her help him out with cooking dinner and also playing a little game of interpersonal trivia, and Derek having to fight an alpha he held a childhood grudge against on his way to save Isaac after his brief encounter with Decalion, and the little extra tidbit of Scott and Styles almost dying at Collie's hands, which ultimately ended with Melissa McCall saving Styles after finding out that her son was some type of monster. Malia and Allison, on the other hand, were on their way to have their own little adventure with no one having the slightest idea of what they're going to do. Unbelievably, this wasn't one of Malia's half-thought harebrained ideas, instead it was Allison's. When Malia had first heard what the girl had said after Allison told her to wait behind after the closing bell, her first thought was that even princesses like Snow White sometimes couldn't handle being all princess-y and dainty every waking day of their life and voluntarily choose to make bad choices just to loosen up a bit and enjoy the thrill that came with those questionable choices, which most times than not, ends up being the worst possible choice they could have made given any scenario. And that was exactly what Allison had proposed. Even Malia could tell how stupid and reckless Allison's proposition was, and that was saying something if Malia of all people called someone's idea reckless, and yet Allison had pushed her into agreeing with what might just be their death sentence. The plan? Given that Derek and Scott were at the hospital and the more than likely event where they'll come across 1 or 2 alphas from the Alpha Pack, this was their best chance to tail the twins and see if they might lead them to where they are keeping Erica locked up. If not that, then at least they'll lead them to the Alpha Pack's den. It was an idea solely based on lucky coincidences, and even though she tried putting up a strong front against it, she just couldn't keep on telling Allison no. Unlike Allison, Malia knew just how scary an alpha could be on their best days. As for royally pissing one off, that's the equivalent of a dead man's tale never told. Seeing Allison not relenting no matter how much she tried, Malia suggested calling Tristan and having him tag along for that second layer of security, but Allison still refused. Malia was about to blow a top until Allison hurriedly explained that they will probably be keeping more of an eye on Tristan and Scott more than the both of them. So basically, we are of lesser threat to them? Malia asked, and it was that moment that Malia fully agreed with Allison's plan, even if it was for a petty reason. As an Argent, Allison was trained in tracking and tagging her prey. Since there was no way she could maintain a track on them without them sniffing her out first, she tagged both of their bikes during all the commotion that happened earlier in the day. Okay, that's enough distance between us. Let's follow them. Allison revved her engine to life, smirking with Malia at the adrenaline rush that came over her with just that simple action. Slowly trailing behind them with a reasonable distance in between to ensure that they weren't seen or found out, they came the secret chase going until the map showed that the twins had stopped driving. Let's go a bit further before continuing on foot. Malia said, and Allison did just that. Unfortunately for Allison's budding excitement, the twins didn't go to where they were keeping Erica but what looked like the house the pack were staying at. Hey, at least this is something. And before you might get any funny ideas, let me just make it clear that we are not searching that house. Not today, hopefully never. Malia said to a downcast Allison after they returned to their car. Sigh. I know. I just thought this might be a good chance to run a surveillance on them without them noticing, at least for a little while, long enough to make something substantial out of it. She said and bashed her head against her seat's headrest. If you're saying this, then you've definitely never been in a hunt. A successful hunt requires patience, I know. My dad says it all the time. She grumbled petulantly. She didn't believe herself to be impatient. Instead, what eats at her the most is being the one in the position to lend her friends all the help they might need, but she ends up being the one doing literally nothing. It's frustrating. Don't worry too much, the tracker is still there, right? We'll just mark all the spots they go to and keep doing it until we can find Erica. Malia tried pointing out the bright, or maybe least dark, side, but Allison turned sullen at that. The tracker's battery will die in a day or two. Not to mention that they might find the tracker if they decide to give their bikes a thorough wash. Well, at least you tried. Which resulted in nothing. Between your eagerness and my bad luck, we might have been found out by either the twins or the returning alphas. I'll pick no results over that any time of the day. Malia said with a blank face. Seeing Allison beside herself and not wanting to be put in a situation where she had to console Allison or give some sappy speech, Malia didn't hesitate and smacked her right across the face. Hey! Ouch! What the hell was that for? Allison shouted in pain as she held her reddened cheek. Don't start bitching like Lydia or some unfortunate sap or I'll slap your other cheek. It disgusts me. Though she didn't say anything and stopped there, her stony expression gave Allison all the rant she wanted. Fine. Allison keyed the ignition and drove back to Malia's house. They were lucky to leave when they did, or else they might have been found out by Decalion, who got out of a taxi moments after they left and surveyed the area with his blind eyes. When Allison and Malia arrived, they were shocked as they saw Lydia and Boyd helping set the table to get started with dinner. Dismissing Boyd's presence as he wasn't exactly a stranger, what had them double guessing what their eyes saw and captured was not only Lydia's presence, but also the fact that she was helping with the cooking. Allison quickly got over it, but Malia apparently didn't, as her peering eyes glued themselves to Lydia that the latter could no longer shrug it off, as it was making her a little uneasy. Mind toning down with Medusa gaze? It's not like I'm trying to steal your boyfriend or anything. Lydia tilted her head, staring squarely at Malia with both hands on her waist. Malia scoffed. I'm not worried about that happening, and I don't think you need me to spell that out for you again, do you? Lydia clicked her tongue, knowing fully well no one could fight Malia on that front, and irately dissatisfied with herself for completely agreeing with Malia. Then mind the glare, would you? Don't worry. I'm not being hostile or anything today, it's just that I can't help but wonder at how much you've changed in such a short time. The you I knew before the whole mental relapse thing was a lot bitchy IR. Just like it always was between her and Malia, the safety on the retort was off, as it was just at the tip of her tongue, ready for tactical deployment at any given moment, but she didn't release it, instead. Thank you. It was a genuine one, same with the small smile plastered on her face. Seeing Lydia turn and go back to helping Tristan in the kitchen instead of the usual biting jab, an incomprehensible look came on Malia's face until it turned into one of shock and uncertainty. She forcefully grabbed Boyd, who was sitting close to her, with a strong grip that made the boy wince, while Allison just watched amusedly. Malia, strong hands. Strong hands. Ignoring all that, she asked him a simple question, almost disbelieving even as the words came out of her mouth. Did I just compliment Lydia? Hey? Maybe, yet. It might as well be a compliment with how you said it. He sighed in relief and rubbed when she grabbed him, still wondering how she acquired such insane grip strength. Still, aren't you behaving a bit too dramatic for a simple compliment? Malia could only shake her head, knowing he wouldn't understand, just like she also didn't. Tisk, better to think about that later. Thinking that way, she turned to Boyd and asked. Why are you here anyway? Boyd pointed at her, Allison and Lydia, and held up 3 fingers. Tristan said being the only guy in the middle of you 3 easily gets him frustrated and tired. He wanted me here to balance things out, as he puts it. Dinner is set, let's eat. Tristan called out while walking out of the kitchen. Chapter 131, Chapter 127. The Alpha Pack. A few minutes after Malia and Allison left, Ennis returned with an injured Callie, much to the surprise of the rest, Decalion included. What happened? Ethan, the younger of the twins, asked in concern. Though surprised, not so much as a twitch in expression made it to Decalion's face, as it passively stared at the severely wounded and bloody form of Callie and Ennis, more the former than the latter thanks to her being shot by wolfsbane-laced bullet. Argents, I presume? The Alpha asked and they both weakly nodded. Chris Argent. They somehow managed to get the Beta out of the hospital room he was in before we got there. Ennis growled. Upon remembering his fight with Derek, his anger spiked even further. Derek is mine. Decalion made no affirmation to that except a little warning. He still has his uses for now, so until then. Turning to Callie, he looked at the wound that was leaking out black blood. Hold her down. With a flick of his fingers, he dug in his claws into Callie's wounds with swift precision and just as quickly pulled out the bullet inside with his claws. The other three had to exert more strength in holding down the injured Alpha while she screamed as Decalion yanked out the bullet. The blind Alpha on the other hand, calmly wiped out the blood on his hands, before picking up his cane and walking out of the room. Burn the remaining poison out of her. He said as he walked out but not before pausing by the door to turn and address the twins. Keep an eye on the children, especially the both of them, at least until we find the druid. Aiden and Ethan breathed out as Decalion left the room. No matter how much time had passed, they still felt skittish whenever he had those blind eyes of his focused on them. Everyone did. Fuck it, guess we're still on watch duty. Ethan said, sounding a bit disgruntled as the only decent fight they've had was chasing down Isaac, that was until the mercenary woman, Brayden, outsmarted them. Knowing what his brother was thinking, Aiden nudged Ethan's sides and shook his head at him. We have all the time to get back at them later. For now, we need to burn out Callie's poison. Both of you hold her down. Ennis said as he lit up the gas canister with a furious scowl on his face. Strongly. Once more, Callie's screams echoed through all the rooms in the house before she passed out as the poison was slowly burned out of her. Seeing the pain his partner was in, Ennis' anger went over its previous limit, making his eyes flicker in red. Decalion said to leave Derek alive for now, but he never insinuated anything about the young Alpha not being beaten to an inch of his life. Ennis had always been one for his quick and short temper after all. Who would blame him? Allison Argent POV. After the surprising dinner at her friend's house, considering that Lydia was there, she slowly drove back home after dropping Boyd off at his house. She had half expected Tristan to kick Lydia out, all things considered, but he weirdly didn't and even had her help him out with cooking dinner. From all what she knew of the socially allergic vampire, that was a lot of concession on his path, but she could somehow understand. She knew Lydia has been feeling somehow left out as of late, maybe because she had no one to hang out with during the holidays. While she always made herself available for her friend, it turned out that it wasn't enough when she realized that Lydia's supernatural side was pretty much an isolated persona, which must have made the self-conscious girl quite lonely. As a girl that loved positive attention at every turn, that must have been something very sensitive to her, which would explain why she was extremely tolerant towards Malia. And no doubt he must have sensed it. As a vampire that could sense emotions, it must have been very nauseating for Tristan any time that she was near, so much so that he caved in. It was clear to anyone who paid attention that Lydia needed heavy therapy, mostly on the supernatural side, but unfortunately, that side wasn't as soft on emotions as the human world was. Pulling herself out from her thoughts as she pulled up to the garage, she groaned audibly as she saw her father standing in front of her car with arms folded across his chest. Seriously, Dad? Is this what we're going to be doing from now on? Chris snorted, mentally sighing in relief when he saw that she was okay, all the whole keeping his face stoic. You can't blame me for being worried, especially when my daughter is pulling off a stubborn streak, now can you? Allison rolled her eyes, a little bit of sass blending into her tone. Really? You should know by now that they won't hurt me unless I give them a reason to, which makes your excuse just that, an excuse. Chris sighed tiredly. He's had to hold his wife back from blowing her top off on multiple occasions after she found out that Allison was still hanging out with werewolves. Why did his daughter pick this exact time to go through her rebellious phase? Truce. Chris pushed himself off the wall and made his way inside the house. There was an attack at the hospital like you speculated. A pack of alphas. That's worrying in numerous degrees. Did they get Isaac? She asked tentatively but became a bit relieved when her father shook his head. What happened? She watched her father scratch his head as he turned to look at her with eyes that clearly told her how unused he was to her acting like this, a mirror of how he looked when serious. The only thing I can think of is getting Derek to join them, but it's never that simple and straightforward with alphas, much less a pack of them. Their reason for coming to Beacon Hills is for something else entirely, Derek being recruited is just a byproduct. They both fell into a short period of silence as they mulled over what they knew so far. Part of her and her father's truce was that they wouldn't keep any secrets from each other. At least the ones that could harm the family. An agreement that made it easier to ask her father for answers she needed if she wanted to help her friends. "Where's Mom?" she asked, confused why her mother hadn't yet appeared with how late she stayed out. "She's out of town for a few days," Chris said. "Allison, how well do you trust the members of the Buddhist pack?" he suddenly asked. Allison shook her head softly. "I don't know anything about the Buddhist pack, so there's no way I can trust them, but if you're asking if I trust Malia and Tristan, then my answer is a resounding yes." They stared hardly at each other for a few seconds, none keen on taking a step back on their conviction. Chris smiled for the first time that day upon seeing Allison's growth reflecting in a pair of resolved eyes, and took a seat in the living room. "I don't trust them, I can't, not yet," he started, "but I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt mostly because I don't think we can deal with a pack of alphas on our own." Allison smiled at that. It wasn't her father giving in, but it was the closest thing she has gotten to an approval, a very positive sign from her father. She even broke her stoic mask and let out a happy grin that made her father chuckle. "Trust me, Dad. You'll love Tristan and Malia once you get to know them. While I highly doubt that, I'm open to changing my opinions." He waved off her words. "That aside, I'll be going on patrol with some of the boys in an hour's time, wanna come along?" Now she was really surprised. Why? Because other than those times during her training, her father had never taken her out for patrol or tracking werewolves along with the other hunters. Sure, she had some reading to do, but who cares? "Sure. I'll go get ready," she said and went upstairs to arrange her gears and weapons for the hunt. After a quick bath, she took her phone and sent Tristan a short message about the conversation she just had with her father and them going out for patrol as a heads up to Tristan and Malia in case they wanted to go out tonight to do some sniffing around. "Tristan, got it. Never intended on going out tonight? Seriously? Will it kill you to put some emotion behind what you type?" She groaned as she received the short dry reply. "Could have at least added in a vampire emoji. Just saying," she muttered. Chapter 132, Chapter 128. A few days passed after the memorable first day of school and things were slowly getting back to normal, as much normal as Beacon Hills High could get. Whether it was due to the past series of events that had happened in the school or around town, it felt as if everyone was subconsciously on guard, at least that's how it felt like to Tristan as he walked down the hall. It felt as if everyone was somehow preparing themselves for another gory news. A murder, an unexplainable animal attack, or maybe people hallucinating and saying they saw humanoid monsters fighting at night. The energy around the school was weird and off-putting to Tristan, but he didn't wave it off. More like he couldn't. He knew for a fact that the next unexplainable series of deaths were about to start. It was also because of this that he found himself with Lydia after finding dazing off in art class. "You also feel it, don't you?" he asked her after the class was over. Lydia's facial expression scrunched up as she tried understanding what she might be feeling but ended up with nothing. "I don't know what's been up with me lately. Sometimes it feels as if I'm walking outside in the dark, completely clueless as to where to go," she said with a defeated sigh. Tristan said nothing to that and picked up her canvas and looked at it. An empty white canvas. "Like I said, I've been out of it lately," she reiterated. She looked at the blank canvas and asked softly, "Do you think we are just being paranoid, or someone is really about to die?" Tristan snorted under his breath. "Someone? Try a good number of people. Humans and supernatural both." Tristan watched as Lydia deflated and her mood plummeted with her emotions becoming bleak. He was about to turn around and leave but had to silently stay his feet as soon as Lydia started speaking. "I've been trying to see if I could predict the deaths on my own but nothing's been working so far. It's like everything went silent after the whole fiasco with Derek and Gerard." She then went on with how she was feeling and how fragile her mental state was getting as of late. Now Tristan wouldn't consider himself a jerk, but he was really considering leaving the classroom as she absent-mindedly kept her tirade going. Where's Allison when you need her? She was the strongest emotional pillar in his friend group when she wasn't having her own emotional breakdown. What do you think I should do, Tristan? She turned around and asked him, hoping he could help her in some way. Tristan on the other hand just shrugged lazily with one shoulder. All I can say is don't force it. A go-to answer, cliché and generic even, but it works. But people will die. She retorted a little sharply that she failed to notice. People will die regardless of what we do. Even if we know who was going to die, it's not guaranteed that we can stop it. Nature is very fickle that way. Lydia was about to give a reply when the door of the classroom was pushed open and a head wearing a helmet popped in. Tristan, there you are. Coach wants everybody on the field, pronto. The lacrosse player said before running off. Don't worry, go. Lydia said, waving him off. We can talk later after your practice. Tristan said nothing and just left her there and went to change into his gear, only to stop when he saw Scott McCall standing in confrontation against the twin alphas. Last he heard was that they might have a clue as to where Erica was being kept, if she wasn't already dead, and both sides had kept their distance, until now that is. Oh? I think we made him angry, Ethan. But what are you going to do about it? Sure enough they were goading him into a fight that he had no way of winning. But why? He didn't intervene as Scott was yet to lose control, but it seemed his action of blatantly staring at them made them notice his presence. Need something, man? One of them asked. Now Tristan, as long back as he knew, would have easily left them to their own devices as he hated doing unnecessary things. But, remembering the taste of an alpha's blood and the phantom feeling of hunger he's been getting lately, he stayed his feet from moving and kept his stare focused on the both of them. How about backing off and not trying to piss off a beta? And you're delaying him for practice. For the first time in a long while, Tristan chose to be passively aggressive rather than just reacting after being attacked. One of them, Ethan, was a little ticked off and tried goading Tristan more. Or what? What are you going to do if we decide not to back off? He took a provocative step forward, a daring gesture to Tristan to ascertain his reaction. Instead of answering him, Tristan looked at Scott and tilted his head in the direction of the boys' locker room. Get going before coach blows a top. It was not that Tristan thought he could take on two alphas, he knew he couldn't. Rather than his normal logical reasoning, he instead chose to follow his instincts and stared off against both alphas. Amused by the beta's false bravado, Ethan took another step forward, and so did Tristan. When cornered, it is said that even a rat will fight back, and Tristan was no rat. His paranoia was at an all-time high with how many times he had to keep his head down to not be involved with the threats flying around. First with Peter, and then with the Kanema and Gerard. Beacon Hills High was something he considered his territory, a sanctuary of sorts, where he could escape the monotone of his everyday life. Him having to be constantly cautious and passive in where he considered a safe space rattled him a fierce thing. Aiden, who had been standing off to the side and watching in amusement, quickly noticed how thick the tension was growing and quickly grabbed his brother's arm. That's enough for now, Ethan. Remember what Decalion said, we only have to keep an eye on them. He didn't bother hiding it because he knew Tristan and his friends already had an idea of why they were here. Ethan tsked and took a step back, letting the tension bleed away. I'll be seeing you around, Tristan. And with that they left, leaving Tristan standing there alone. Now what was that? He shook his head and turned to leave. His actions were surprising, but to him that didn't matter. What did was how he felt through it all. How his blood seemed to throb as the tension between them started rising. And he understood it. That was his instincts. Just like Malia fully embraced her coyote aspect and the violent tendencies that came with it, he embraced his for a little bit and he got a taste of what it was. A primal hunger to taste the most delicious blood he could find. A stray thought had flashed through his mind during the stare-off. How would the blood of a pair of young twin alphas taste? It was such a tantalizing thought that he could almost swear he smelt the taste of their blood. Hayes! You're late! Coach's shrill screams blasted his ears drums as soon as he arrived on the field. Take a long stick. You are on goal for the day. Hell! Yes, coach. Great. Now he would have to stay put in the small goal and catch an unending barrage of shots all day. Tristan found it hard to pay attention to the lessons being taught the following day as his mind went back to his talk with Satomi the day before after his foolish standoff against two alphas. The old alpha had wisely said that he might be finally experiencing his supernatural rebellious phase, connecting with his primal instincts, she had said. He wasn't surprised. Not even a single bit when he heard that. He had spent his whole life, as much as he could remember of it, watching and copying Satomi and the others for what he considered as ideal characteristics. Suppress your true instincts for so long and you'll end up losing control of it when you least expect it, more so for us werewolves and you, a vampire, those were her exact words. When she had asked what he wanted to do concerning it, he had given her the same answer he gave Lydia. He would go with the natural flow instead of trying to force it. It's rare to see you so out of it, Trist. Take it from me, being your primal best self is not bad, the opposite even. It feels great. Malia jumped on him from behind as soon as he stood up to leave. Weirdly, I actually agree with you, he said, earning him a painful bite on his ears. Rude. Malia harumphed. Right, before I forget. A girl from a party went missing. Chapter 133, Chapter 129. Styles said he was with her moments before she disappeared. Was it a coincidence that someone died the very day Lydia shared her concerns about her incompetence as a banshee? Yes. Did it give more credence and urgency to her words? Doubly so. And Stilinski. He's pretty shaken up, but I think he'll be dragging Scott to help sniff her out after school. Allison said, sitting on top of Tristan's desk while Malia sat on his lap, none of them caring for the stray gazes sent their way. Think it's the alphas. Malia wiggled on top of Tristan as she shook her head slowly. Your dad was right in saying that it was something else that brought the alphas back to Beacon Hills and not just Derek. You're saying that her death is related to what might have drawn them back to Beacon Hills. Allison contemplated that line of thought, but she couldn't paint any tangent from it, so she looked at Tristan for his opinion, but he appeared lost in his own thoughts. What's up with him? Bad night? She questioned Malia while curiously observing Tristan's lost eyes. Malia rolled her eyes at the last part of the question and replied as she twisted his nose rather harshly. He's just being annoyingly retrospective for no good reason. You both know that I can hear you, right? He said as he adjusted his seating position and cradled Malia comfily against himself. As for your question, I have no idea. I can't think of anyone or anything stupid enough to cause problems with a pack of alphas. When they thought about it, Tristan's words made a lot of sense. Who in their right mind would be dumb or suicidal enough to cross Dukalion and his people? That said, it can also be that just like Derek, they came for someone. Either to kill or to recruit. He added. As expected of them, they immediately caught on to what he was trying to say. They are looking for an alpha? Malia asked in a statement-like way. Tristan nodded. That or someone in position to be one. There could have any reason for being here, big, small, and / or sentimental. Allison tilted her head confusedly. Sentiments? Who knows? Maybe they just wanted the last Hail Alpha to join them. Another good point. Both girls thought. They stopped thinking about it as they had nothing on the pack's reason for being here. Both girls chose to drop the topic, but Malia suddenly remembered something, causing her to cutely tap her lips contemplatively. Then what was that with the crows? I doubt that was an alpha's influence on forest animals. Tristan paused and tried thinking about it, but he ended up drawing blanks all the same. We'll know in time. Derek Hale POV. Derek could only sigh in relief after he heard from Brayden and Styles that they knew where Erica was being kept. It turns out that the reason why the twin alphas went after Isaac was because he had found out where Erica was being kept, but was then found out by the twins, who were then tasked to either capture or kill him. His only lucky star was that he was saved by Brayden, who also had found the place from her contractor, putting both her and Isaac in the crosshairs of the group of alphas. Are you going to tell me who contracted you to help me? Derek asked, but all he got was a no can't do from the all-black leather-wearing black mercenary. Just know that Erica is not the only beta they have chained up. Who it is, I have no idea. Heads up, they'll definitely be expecting you. Brayden informed him while her hand rested on the sawn-off shotgun holstered to her waist. You are leaving? Yes. After I just ran afoul of Dukalion's pack, I have no intention of sticking around any longer. Not when I just completed my contract. She remarked as she packed all her weapons into a bag. She took a few steps and stopped to give Derek the main objective of her contract. All they told me is that you are not Dukalion's target. Derek frowned, but inquired regardless. What's his target then, or rather who? Brayden held two of her fingers up. Two people, both with the potential to surpass the Demon Wolf. Scott McCall and Tristan Hayes. See you later, Derek Hale. And with that she was gone. While he didn't understand Decalion's interest in Scott, he could make a guess. I'm Tristan's case. From what he could get from Brayden, every alpha in Decalion's pack is special in some way. Even the twins could somehow combine into one body and form some kind of super alpha, so it wasn't all that surprising given what Tristan was. But what about Scott? Did Decalion want Scott to kill him for the spark? He picked up his phone and put in a call to Scott, temporarily forgetting about Decalion's interest in both teens. Scott, I need you here immediately after school. Isaac and I are going to rescue Erica and you're coming along with us. I'll be there as soon as possible. Ending the call there, the next call he put out was to Tristan. Even if he couldn't help now due to Satomi's orders, he figured he could still ask for it and give him a heads up regarding what he heard from Brayden. Hey Tristan, are you alone right now? Yes. He then gave the young vampire a short summary of what he'd learned so far concerning the Alpha Pack. Tristan. In other words, he'll sooner or later attack and kill my family to force me to join him. Derek let out a weary breath that showed just how stressed out he was of recent. More than likely, yes. I suggest you tell Satomi as soon as you can. He warned. What do you think she'll do if you tell her? Probably move out those who might not want to fight, meaning no one, and then have a talk with Decalion. Tristan's reply came in with calmly articulated words. And you? What are you going to do? Derek asked. The last time we fought an alpha, you stole the kill from me, though I'll admit he was rightfully yours to kill. I wonder how I'll feel after draining an alpha dry of all his blood. Derek chuckled morbidly, a sentiment he shared, though he was more of a ripping out throats guy. Nevertheless he could relate, still he felt he had to remind Tristan. These aren't your normal alphas, Tristan. Decalion, Ennis, and Callie are one of the strongest alphas of their time when they were in Beacon Hills. I can tell you that Peter has nothing on them. It was a harrowing thought whenever he remembered that he was about to face 5 super strong alphas with just 2 betas by his side. It was a losing battle, he knew, but he couldn't bear to lose Erica. Not anymore. I know. Tristan's voiceover said before adding a short sentence before he cut the call. Malia and I will be there. The way a long breath left his lungs, anybody could tell that those words brought a certain amount of relief to Derek. Most likely because he had fought alongside the both of them before and the confidence he had in their strength. They both could hold an alpha down regardless of how hard it could be. While that still left 3 or 4 alpha unaccounted for him and his betas to face, even with the high probability of losing, it wasn't as apparently bleak as it looked a few minutes ago. Just hang on for a bit, Erica. Tristan Hayes POV. Trist. Malia called out worriedly as she saw how animated he started acting after hearing what Derek told him. What happened? What did Derek say to him? A concerned Allison asked upon seeing how strange the both of them were behaving. Tristan, talk to me. What did Derek say? A look they were both familiar with as his irritated face took over his facial expression for a brief moment before it receded, giving way to a fed-up look on Tristan. Looking at both their worried faces, he waved his hand in a nonchalant manner. Relax, it's nothing serious. He said, causing Allison to breathe out in relief, a breath she let out too quick, while Malia continued staring at him. Something about Decalion wanting me in his pack or something of that nature. Meaning he might start attacking the other members of my pack to force my decision to join him. The way he simplified the horrific words he just said was what stumped Allison. Looking at it from my point of view, my vampiric instincts kicking in now is an opportune timing. Allison grabbed his hand in genuine worry. What are you guys going to do, Tristan? Tristan refused to let his worry for his pack show on his face, so just as nonchalantly as he spoke before, he answered Allison in tone. What else? We'll try to kill them before they kill us. One alpha at a time. Chapter 134, Chapter 130. Whether it was Tristan, Malia, Allison, or Scott, they all patiently waited for the closing bell to sound before they all drove off to their targeted locations. Allison rushed home to tell her father, immensely worried about Tristan and Malia trying to fight off 5 alphas while trying to rescue Erica at the same time. Tristan, Malia, and Scott on the other hand hurried to Derek's location as fast as they could. Tristan had Malia call Satomi and tell her what happened just because he didn't want his grandma to talk him out of his current mind state. Thankfully, she couldn't convince Malia otherwise, with her only concession being that she was making her way over as soon as possible. Arriving at the location Derek had them, they saw Derek and Isaac standing there waiting for them. Are we going now or are we waiting for nightfall? Tristan asked as soon as he stepped out of the car. Derek replied, "We're going now. Might as well take all the advantage we can even if it amounts to it being inconsequential. Anything I might want to know?" He directed at Tristan, subtly asking of Satomi's reaction. "She'll be there. Maybe the Argents too," Tristan said and got back inside the car as they drove off. The place Erica was held in was inside a bank building that was shut down years ago. "There are definitely some presences inside, but something is blocking me from knowing how many they are, but I can tell the general location," Tristan said as soon as they arrived. "A barrier? Mountain ash probably," Derek said. They hurried inside the building with Isaac and Tristan guiding them to a bank vault. With the two of them pushing open the vault, they found out that they couldn't proceed even when Erica was but a few meters away from them because of the ash circle inside the vault. A conundrum. So close, yet so far away. The truth of reality is always such a cruel thing. A voice echoed behind them, drawing their attention and forcing them to turn towards it. "Decalion," Derek growled out. Just at that moment, the other 4 members of the Alpha Pack showed up bearing furrowed grins on their faces. "Now then, Derek Hale, what will your answer be? Are you going to continue remaining a fool and face the harsh truth of reality, or will you make the correct choice? Let them go first, then we'll talk. How about that?" Derek asked back. They stood off against the Alphas, an Alpha, a Vampire, a Wercoyote, and 2 Beta Werewolves, a lacking lineup against the opposing group of 5 Alphas, but none of them took a step back. Decalion slowly shook his head as he spoke with regret in his voice. "You are just as stubborn and naive as your mother, Derek. And I don't think any of us need a reminder of what that resulted in." He then took his gaze away from a seething Derek and glanced between Tristan and Scott. Tristan was a bit surprised seeing the old man he and Boyd had helped cross a road, but that was it. A brief moment of realization. "Now then, I sincerely hope that the both of you are wiser than Derek Hale, so I'll ask, join me and all the powers you want will be at your fingertips. You need not fear the hunters no more or constantly watching your backs. Join me and evolve." Being near the mountain ash, Tristan could feel them clearly now, 2 girls, in extremely weakened states, extremely feral too. He looked at the Alphas before them and just seeing those 4 pairs of glowing red eyes made all the hair on his body stand on their ends and sent an irritating crawling sensation all over his body. They were strong, extremely so. Especially Decalion. As far as Tristan's instincts were concerned, the blind elderly man was no wolf but a demon instead. He was way above whatever Tristan thought was the height of an Alpha's strength. No one here was winning against Decalion, not even if they attacked him together, was the feeling he got from the seemingly harmless blind man. While Scott declared his refusal and choice to continue sticking with Derek, Tristan's response was a pair of freezing cold blue eyes. And that was the spark that descended everything into chaos. In response to his blatant provocation, the Alphas roared and attacked them. Derek found himself embroiled with a vengeful Ennis who went in straight for the kill with a momentum only a physically strong Alpha like him could move with. Tristan let out a silent breath when he noticed that Decalion wasn't interested in joining in. Thinking fast and relying on his instincts, Tristan quickly judged who he felt was the strongest of the remaining 3 and threw himself at Callie, who had been making her way towards Isaac and Scott. "Out of my way, kid!" she growled irritatingly. Instead of answering her with his words, blood encased his fingers, hands, and feet, while 4 blood-red tail-like appendages sprouted out from his back waist bone. Callie was taken aback with surprise when she saw Tristan's change, while Decalion's eyes behind his glasses gleamed as his senses painted Tristan's change in his head. Soon Callie's surprise turned into a bloodthirsty grin. She stepped out of her shoes, allowing Tristan to see the black claws on her hands and feet that were longer than a usual werewolf's claws, Alphas included. "Since you barred me from my praise, try to make this a little bit enjoyable for me." She licked her lips dangerously and lunged at Tristan. 2 of his tails crossed in front of him as Callie brought down her hands in a slash which forced Tristan to jump back as her claws easily slashed through them. "You're full of surprises. No wonder Decalion wants you with us." She sounded impressed, more so at his quick, almost instant, reflex, and how the slash she gave those tails disappeared just as quick. With a quick glance around, he saw Malia fighting one of the twins while Isaac and Scott fought off the other, though they were getting beat up. Tristan did a backflip and shot a sharp solidified tail at Callie as he twisted midair before landing. While Callie's overall speed was on par with his, he had the edge over her in agility with his nimble tails and his natural flexibility. Yet the problem remained her reaction and reflexes. It was nothing to scoff at, reminding Tristan once again that he was fighting an alpha. A very experienced one to boot. You jump around too much. She complained irritatedly as she dodged a bloody skewer and sliced through the 2 bloody darts Tristan shot at her. Tristan racked his mind on how to gain an advantage over Callie, with the only answer he came up with being getting close to her and engaging her directly. He couldn't waste his own blood too much as it'll dull his movements and senses, so he refrained from sprouting out more tails and letting Callie cut through them. So you finally stopped running around, eh? Your words are annoying. Tristan said and dashed towards her, not minding the fact that he just opened himself to getting severely injured. And it came just as quickly as he thought it'd come. With the greater reach of his tails, he formed one into a serrated blade's edge and tried to sever Callie with it, only for the highly adaptable Alpha to drop down to a split and narrowly avoid getting cut. Not that it stopped her from slashing her claws unforgivingly at Tristan's exposed midsection. She wanted to go for another slash but was forced to dodge as 2 blood tails in the form of spiked branches were directed at her. Tristan followed after her evasion, already having congealed the blood around his wound to stop the bleeding. Callie rolled on the floor as she avoided 3 tails that attempted to pierce through her and pushed herself off the ground to gain an upright balance, but Tristan was already on it. With the 3 tails pinned to the floor, he used it to pull himself forward towards the rebounding Callie like a catapult and dug his claws straight for her heart, which she blocked at the last second. Instead of clawing out a huge lump of flesh over where her heart was, Callie shifted her body slightly and Tristan's claws dug into her shoulders and ripped down 4 deep nasty lines from her shoulder to her elbow. Argh! You filthy bastard! In a show of superhuman reflexes, the crazy Alpha grabbed Tristan's hands with her other one and drew him towards her while using her legs' claws to slash open the first wound she had given him on his stomach. Tristan shot backwards and crashed into the ground with his hands clutching his stomach while he groaned in pain. Standing a few meters away from him was Callie with one limping shoulder as she held her furiously bleeding arm. At this moment, the hate she felt towards Tristan surpassed whatever she felt towards Styles and Scott, or even Chris Argent who shot her. I'll make sure to have fun when I start ripping out your flesh from your bones. She cackled darkly with red gleaming eyes that promised a tortured ending to Tristan by her hands. I guess the feeling is mutual then. Though I'm more of a suck your blood dry type of guy. For the first time, a bloody grin marred Tristan's face even as he faced his prospective death. Chapter 135, Chapter 131. Ennis welcomed Derek with a spear dive that brought the both of them to the ground with him on top of the groaning Alpha. He joined his hands together overhead and brought it down on Derek's head in a skull-crushing bash that created a deep wide crack on the concrete floor below them. Not feeling so cocky now, hey! Grabbing and lifting Derek up by the scruff of his neck, Ennis smashed him against the floor again, deepening the cracks even more. Picking up Derek again with the intent to smash him to a batter paste against the ground, he raised him up again but Derek pulled both of his legs between them and pushed Ennis back in a desperate escape that luckily worked out for him. Guess you still got some fight in you. Better yet for me and bad for you. He chuckled bestially as he patted the dust off his body while watching Derek struggling to stand up on wobbly feet. Shaking off the vertigo assaulting his addled brain, Derek looked at Ennis and briefly wondered if Decalion actually planned this, knowing fully well that he won't be able to focus on his fight when his beta was imprisoned inside a vault of mountain ash. One thing at a time, Derek. You know she's alive and that's all that matters for now. He muttered to himself and proceeded to crack his neck and shoulders, already healed the concussion Ennis gave him with those slams. The intensity of his red eyes matched that of Ennis as they both roared at each other. Slowly by the second, Derek's face started changing as he fully shifted into his werewolf form with elongated ears, a hideous face and grown facial hair. Ennis mirrored Derek and shifted, his grin stretching wider as the strength from this state filled his bones. The 2 alphas with personal vendettas against each other rushed at each other with only the thought of killing the person in front of them permeating their mind. None caring a bit about what Decalion might have said. Their fight was akin to a pair of adult bulls clashing on a frozen lake, breaking everything into splinters and cracks with every collision they made. Claws, slashes, bites, everything went into play as they fought to rip out the other's life as quickly as possible. On the other side of the building was Malia fighting against Aiden, and of all the fights currently taking place inside the abandoned bank, Malia had the easiest time with her opponent when compared to the rest. Aiden was clearly stronger than her, speed and strength combined, and the only thing that reduced the amount of injuries she sustained was her experience fighting, of which she was a natural. So even if Aiden had the upper hand in the fight, she could hold her own pretty well. Maybe because they've only been an alpha for like a year, she quickly noticed that the way they fought was nowhere as refined and feral as Callie and Ennis. Do you mind stopping this? I'd rather I don't keep hurting you if I can help it. Face it, you can't beat me. Aiden said as he stared at Malia. The coyote laughed amusedly and straightened her disjointed shoulder as she laughed. And let me guess, because you're an alpha and I'm a beta. Yes, and you know it. Trust me, trying to fight against Decalion is pointless. It'll be better for everyone if Scott and Tristan came under him. You could convince him even, so why don't you? He asked, feeling clearly baffled, but then he remembered. They had no idea the kind of monster Decalion was. Malia didn't care or bother to listen to anything he said, except a single part that caught her attention, that is. Hey? Did you just say I should convince Tristan to leave me? She asked in a monotone dead voice that tingled on Aiden's instincts in a prickly way. A foreboding omen rather than an outright danger. It'll be better for everyone that way, he gave a plain reply that was cut shut as Malia pounced on him, fully shifted, growling and roaring as she attacked him like a rabid animal. Malia and Tristan absolutely hate therapy for one reason and one reason only: they absolutely loathed and abhorred the fact that the unhealthiness of their obsessed feelings for each other and the crippling level of dependence they had on each other being called into question and being advised to fix it. And Aiden's words just managed to tick off all Malia's bad spots. Another thing among the members of the Buddhist pack that they all knew was that Malia was the closest to being a true beast out of all of them. When others would go through a phase and balance their werewolf instincts with their human one, Malia didn't bother with balance and fully embraced her coyote side more than she ever did her human side. So instead of a rabid animal attacking aimlessly like Aiden had thought, Malia's coyote instincts went into overdrive and all she knew was the easiest way to kill the prey in front of her. So when Aiden dodged her lunge at him quite easily, she forcefully twisted her waist to Aiden's direction and slashed 3 claw marks on one side of his face. The moment she landed, she leapt towards Aiden relentlessly, but the alpha now watched her haphazard movements seriously and drove a low kick to the side on her head as she came into his range. He had thought that would rattle her out and make her dizzy for a while, only for his eyes to widen as she latched herself on his sides and bit down hard on his neck and greedily drank his blood despite Aiden's screams as he tried to pry her off. He kept on hitting her on her head and stomach and yanked her head off his neck as soon as she let up her grip a bit. In his angered state, he wanted to drive his fist into her mouth and break a few of her teeth, but his brother's scream alerted him of an incoming spike of crystallized blood which he narrowly dodged, once again turning out be a bad decision on his part as Malia drove a knee to his dick, forcing him to keel over. In his hunched position, Malia unceremoniously drove her heel into his head in an axe kick that cracked the floor below them. She grabbed his leg and spun him around and smashed his head against the nearby pillar, which broke off a huge chunk of it. Without hesitation, Malia brought her claws to reap the alpha's life, but her hand was caught by Ethan, who then flung her away and knelt beside his brother. He took off his coat and then stabbed his hand into his brother's exposed back. What followed after surprised Isaac, Scott, and Malia as they saw Ethan's body melding into Aiden's body until what remained was a 7-foot huge and muscled alpha werewolf. Isaac and Scott's beaten forms looked tired as they saw the newly formed monstrosity who was currently marching towards Malia. The giant alpha, after taking a few steps towards Malia, suddenly stopped before reacting fast and turning to catch 2 arrows shot at him. He looked at where they came from and smiled mockingly at Allison, only for the girl to sweetly return the smile, and that was the last thing he saw as the 2 arrows exploded with an intense light that made his eyes feel like they were melting and completely threw off his balance as he felt like he was thrown into an ever-changing kaleidoscope. He instinctively put his hands over his face in an effort to shield any sniping to his head, but instead of his head, what he felt was 3 searing burns as Chris Argent charitably deposited 3 bullets into his torso, which forced him to forcefully separate back into a pair of knocked and wounded twins. Allison, the V-Vault. Erica's in there," Isaac forced himself to say before collapsing to the ground as he saw Allison nod and move towards the vault lined with mountain ash. Up on the stairs watching the fight below was Decalion, without any trace of concern plaguing him even as he saw Ennis and Derek inching near their deathbed, not even with the twins being shot and incapacitated with the arrival of the Argents. Argents. This takes me back," he said softly to himself and briefly contemplated going down and ending that accursed house once and for all, but his thoughts were cut short as he felt another presence walking slowly towards him. Decalion. What an ill-opportune time for us to meet after so long. Satomi had arrived, but what she didn't bring along with her was the warmth her presence usually exuded. Right now she felt like the surface of a rock on a blizzard night. Satomi, I figured we'd cross paths one of these days. I just didn't think today would be that day," he said as he turned to face her, all joviality gone from his face, with the only remaining being the visage of the man who stood atop Alpha's Decalion, the Alpha of Alphas. "I hope this will be the only time I tell you this. Keep my grandchild out of whatever plans you have made, or I'll make sure it will be your greatest and last regret for however short you'll live." Satomi had no intention of mincing words, not when she knew how prideful, stubborn, and headstrong alphas could be, especially the ones like Dukalion. Being threatened by the Buddhist wolf, now that's something no one has heard of. Dukalion said in an even tone as if Satomi's threat had no effects on him. Will you heed my words or not? The air turned thick, almost in a metaphysical way that was felt by everyone down below, even by Chris and Allison. Dukalion shifted his gaze from Satomi and took a quick glance at Scott and Tristan, lingering more on the latter. A vampire. Do you know that the oldest books ever documented on them called them the first Rippers? Chapter 136, Chapter 132. Tristan's body was completely riddled with patches of coagulated blood as he found it harder and harder to force his regeneration due to the dampening effect Kali's claws had on him due to her status as an alpha. Just as his fight with her threatened to tap him into something primal, the same it was for Kali. When was the last time she had such a fight that she actually struggled to kill her prey? The last time anything came to this was when she slaughtered her own pack to join Dukalion, but even then, the thrill she was feeling now wasn't present then. She really struggled to adapt to his complex movements and the way he attacked. Oh, she really wanted to kill him now, a compliment Tristan wholly agreed with. This was the first chance he's had in fighting someone while using his blood because Malia didn't count. If not for his quick reflexes and his blood control, Kali would have succeeded in ripping open his throat a couple number of times. As the feeling of inching and escape from sure death spurred his instincts further on, the irritation of missing her prey for so many times made Kali grow more feral. In all her life, Tristan just took the permanent number 2 spot of the people she most wanted to kill. Ducking under her leg swipe, Tristan grunted in pain as the heel of her other leg impacted a closing wound and sent him skidding back. Alphas really are different. Only now was he realizing just how lucky they were to fight Peter when he was yet but an inexperienced alpha. His body subconsciously shivered at the thought of how exponentially monstrous Peter could have been had he been an alpha for, say, a year. If he had to compare the two of them, Peter had a more feral air around him due to how mutated he was as an alpha, while everything about Kali felt threatening. And the worst part? She had only been using a partial shift all this while. Taking a step back, his claws slashed down to cut her outstretched hand, but she deftly blocked it, and expecting her to either pull him in or break his limb, Tristan reacted instantly and the coagulated blood on that hand spiked out and pierced through Kali's hand, forcing her to pull back her hand. Tristan had lost a good amount of blood and that pressured him to use it more conservatively and sparingly, even forcing him to call back 2 of his blood tails into his body. Kali's face darkened even more at Tristan's last ass pull, anger climbing higher seeing he was constantly trying to push her into being defensive. You filthy leech! She growled as Tristan was up on her again. They fought in such a primal and precise way that felt both horrific and entrancing to watch. Neither wasted any moment in their attacks as each of them were initiated with the intent of killing their prey or fatally wounding them. While Tristan dodged most of Kali's attacks, the woman blocked his with seasoned experience, leading the young vampire to be more susceptible to taking more damage from her than he dealt to her. While you keep trying to sneak around me, Aiden is already halfway through killing your little girlfriend if she's any good. I wonder what face you'll make when the sound of her heartbeat no longer reaches your ears. Maybe you'll lose control and turn rabid, who knows? She taunted darkly, steadily trying to push the boy's rationality over its tipping point. No matter how much he tried to keep his heartbeat and blood flow steady to remain calm and focused throughout the fight, Kali could only scoff at the futility of his actions. He was just a teenager, basically a child from the perspective of both worlds, and while admirable, there was no way he could achieve what even the most hardened warriors could not. Tristan did not react to her taunt, but that only caused Kali's dark grin to grow darker. I'm an alpha, boy. You can control your heartbeat and blood all you want, but I can still smell the worry in your emotions even if you try to hide them, she smirked. And she was right. With the smell of blood and aggression so thick in the air, the feral state he was in as he fought against Kali and the realization of how strong she was, how could he not worry about Malia? Was such a notion even possible for him? Especially when she was fighting against an alpha on her lonesome. Gotcha, Kali's grin, as her black claws that had grown even longer snapped straight at his heart with such blinding speed that left no doubt about it piercing right through his body, faltered. She had used the very split second, when his attention divided to check on Malia and momentarily caused his reaction to slow down for that impossibly tight window, to attack him knowing he couldn't dodge fast enough, only for her claws to be stopped at the last moment. Almost instinctively, Tristan had forced the healing wounds on his chest area, even the ones that were only a centimeter wide from closing up, to erupt open to form a hard thick protective shell over his heart while also forming numerous tentacles to wrap over the hand, slowing it down from digging in further. Her actions and Tristan's reaction happened in the split of a fraction's moment that his best efforts, while it kept him alive, couldn't stop her hands from piercing the shell and digging a bit into his flesh that he had to grab the hand. She growled fiercely as he blocked her attack still, and used her other hand to finish the job. At this point, Tristan was using his senses more than his eyes, even coughing up blood, but he still managed to react to the second salvo from Callie by using his two tails to block her hand's trajectory. His body was already rattled and out of balance when he stopped the first hand that stopping the second one sent him flying back. Arg! He groaned in pain as he pushed himself to his feet. He couldn't risk a moment being unfocused to wallow in pain, not when his opponent was Callie, otherwise the results would be disastrous just like she had shown. Should I risk it? He mumbled to himself. He had lost so much blood and his regeneration was gradually slowing down to a crawl with every injury she cut in his body. His claws also slowed her down a bit and made the wounds he gave her harder to heal, but nowhere near the extent of effect hers had on him. Right now, what he needed the most was to drink a good amount of fresh blood, something she was acutely aware of which made her keep a sharp focus on him every time he came very close to her. I'll admit that you are strong, kid. Unfortunately, you lack an understanding of just how fundamental the difference between us is. She slowly stated. A little drink wouldn't hurt, if she doesn't snap my spine in the process that is. While he doubted that they had been fighting for quite some time, he knew he needed blood urgently or he'll risk his healing coming to a crawling halt. He had already come up with a desperate last resort attack plan that'll increase his chance of him drawing blood from her, but the question was if he'll survive to savor it. Whatever. Making up his mind, he waited for her to come to him. And while the smirk on her face told him that she had an idea of what he might try to do, he didn't care. It was called a last resort for a reason. As she came near him, he jumped back and she trailed him. She swung her leg when she got close enough, but Tristan blocked it, along with the two more strikes that followed. Fortunately for him, what he wanted to do required no strategy or planning on his part except being in close proximity with her. The moment he deflected another of her hand strike was the moment he acted. Just like him, Callie was too drunk on their fight that she began using her senses more than her eyes, which turned out to be a bad thing because as soon as Tristan spat the blood in his mouth into her eyes, a bloody fog immediately spewed out of his body, which confused Callie for a second that Tristan used to his fullest. Attacking from behind, his two tails wrapped around each of Callie's hands to hold them apart while he sunk his fangs voraciously into her neck like a starved beast. He didn't forget to inject his fangs poison into Callie's body as he drank her blood while she roared in defiance. And like that, sparks went off in his head as the most intoxicating blood he's ever drank flowed down his throat greedily. Chapter 137, Chapter 133. Tristan felt like a drought-parched soil that was suddenly subjected to rainfall on a sunny day. It was heartwarming if nothing else. His blood started boiling in excitement as he finally drank an alpha's blood after so long. It was as if his head suddenly cleared up and he could finally see and breathe well. It was a sensation he knew he would never be able to get over, like the never-ending thirst he's always felt could be sated with this blood. The way Callie screamed and thrashed around while trying to free her hands were warnings to Tristan not to get drunk on the taste of her blood. His senses that had been running in overdrive for some time now could finally relax a little, and with his mind now cleared, his senses swept Malia's direction and saw the dire state she was in. She was being held up by Aiden, and the air around the Alpha told Tristan that he was seconds from killing her. He was already struggling with holding a berserk Callie down, and there was no way he could leave her to go help Malia because he knew she'd chase after him. Might even tell Aiden to hold him down just so she could kill Malia in front of him. Another tail sprouted behind him, and with a mental flick, it sent a blood shard at Aiden from behind, but Ethan's shout alerted the other twin of something coming from behind. Shit! His intervention just now and lapse in concentration enabled Callie to bring her hands closer to his head. His blood sense picked up the presence of two people, Allison and her father, making him mentally sigh in relief as the young hunter knocked two arrows on her bow pointing at the giant Alpha the twins had fused to become. With his attention now fully on Callie, he found that despite his rejuvenation from drinking her blood, he was still losing the contest in strength when she was the one supposed to be growing weaker. Grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr magnified facial profile of Callie in her full werewolf form and had one of her red eyes staring coldly at him. The more he tried holding back her hands, the more they slowly inched closer to his neck, and it was only when they came dangerously close to his head did he ultimately let go of her neck and hurriedly detach himself a good distance from her. Callie fell to her knees as a feeling of numbness assaulted her, but she forced herself back to her feet and looked at Tristan. Unlike the other looks she had given him, this time her face was blank and even her emotions were stable. To Tristan, who had his full attention on her, it felt as if she was sleeping on her feet with eyes wide open that were coincidentally staring in his direction. "I'll kill you." Even her tone was bland without any vibration of emotion behind it. And frankly, Callie's current behavior made Tristan skittish. It was pretty clear at this point to the both of them that the fight was not going to end until one of them died, a two-way sentiment shared between the both of them. It was only after drinking a good amount of Callie's blood that Tristan finally understood what it was that he was missing. Just like Deaton had told him and Malia that vampires too could climb the evolutionary ladder but had no knowledge of it, Tristan had finally figured it out. It was blood. It had always been blood all along. Right before he pushed himself off Callie, his instincts roused sharply that all he needed was to keep drinking. To continue drinking until every single bit of flowing blood in Callie's body is sucked dry by him, and then he'd have it her alpha spark. In the same way that would make someone cry out in pain if they were hurt, so also did it come instinctually to him. Tristan knew that this wasn't the time to hold back any longer, especially when Callie seemed so off. 5 long blood-red claws came out from the back of his hands along with 5 tails sprouting behind him. They blurred at each other at the same time, with Tristan running while Callie was on all fours like an unnaturally nimble feline. With each tail sporting serrated edges and all his fingers covered in red sharp claws, he met Callie head-on. And like he had speculated, this Callie was way different, too animalistic even, than how she had previously been. Not caring for the injuries, she had recklessly bitten into one of his tails and tore it in two. With Callie now fully shifted to her werewolf form, the advantage was obviously in her favor. Factoring in her present state and how wildly she was acting, having little to no care for the injuries she received as long as she doled out more to Tristan, the advantage she had against him increased exponentially. She punched him twice, from both sides, and when he used his tail, she only dodged slightly and grabbed it as it passed her side before severing it. As far as Tristan was concerned, Callie was the most dangerous alpha of the pack sans Decalion. Just when he thought he had her figured out, she went batshit crazy and became suicidal. She was ripping open new wounds on his body just as much as he was doing on hers, that Tristan slowly started leaving from fighting rationally to letting his wilder instincts take over, and just letting himself be intoxicated in drawing out and splashing around all her blood as if she was a palette and the world around them was the canvas. An artistic beauty in their rabid struggle. It was clear to anyone if they were watching that both of them were going to die after they started clawing out lumps of flesh from each other. All of Tristan's tail and reinforced claws had been ripped in half and broken up by Callie, but that was no concern to him. All he could feel was Callie's beating heart that kept on pumping even as it slowed down, just like his. All that he cared about now was to get that heart to stop beating as he sucked out all the blood pumping through her veins, and so he threw his last piece of rationality away and dived Callie to the ground and sank his fangs into her. Callie too sank her row of sharp fangs into Tristan's neck and started sucking his blood. After all, no one said werewolves couldn't nourish themselves by sucking a prey's blood or eating its flesh. Allison trembled as she watched the most brutal display her eyes has ever experienced. After incapacitating the twins, she heeded Isaac's words and went to free Erica from the mountain ash barrier she was kept in, only to be attacked by 2 werewolves, Erica and another girl. Her scream had alerted her father, who hurried to her position to find her fighting off a werewolf with her stun baton after managing to blind the other werewolf. Her father swiftly incapacitated the other werewolf by sedating her and held off the other one for Allison to take out with a tranquilizing round. With the 2 werewolves secured, they came back out to witness the only fight still going on, if it could still be called a fight at this point. Allison looked at Callie. The confident and stunning woman she once met when browsing for new bows was now like a starving, mentally deranged hyena. She then looked at Tristan and felt conflicted by what she saw. Yes, she has seen Tristan being a vampire once and slaughtering his way through hunters, but this felt different somehow. To her unbiased opinion on watching them, somewhere in her mind completely agreed that they looked like rabid wild animals that deserved to be gunned down. The sight was just that scary and disturbing, more so had any ignorant person being subjected to it. Do you see this, Allison? I won't say anything regarding your view on them, but remember that this is what lies beneath every single one of them once they give in to their bloodlust. She heard her father saying beside her. She wanted to fiercely defend Tristan but held her tongue as she knew any words spoken in his defense would be seen as naivete. And her father might even start doubting her view on supernatural creatures. Despite Chris' cold words, the nozzle of his gun was pointed at Callie with steady hands, patiently waiting for the clear shot. However, before he could take his shot, a sharp whooshing sound sailed past him as Allison's bow released 2 arrows that embedded themselves deep into Kali's sides, which forced her to release her fangs from Tristan to howl loudly in pain. Chris looked at his daughter, noting how steady her breathing was and how her body didn't shake or tremble a tiny bit. There was no longer any hint of hesitation in her mind as to what her action showed. As a father, he'll watch for a considerate distance, and maybe he'll find out why his daughter was so adamant when it came to these particular pair of supernaturals. Everybody watched in silence as Tristan continued drinking Kali's blood until her body stopped moving altogether, and yet he continued to drink her blood till the very last drop, and only then did he stop. A/N. Someone mentioned that I was highballing the alphas of Dukalion's pack out of proportion with how Derek and Tristan repeatedly compare them to Peter and view him as weaker. Yes, I did make the alphas stronger, but not out of proportion. Personally, I'd say Peter is individually stronger than Ennis and the twins. If the twins combine, I'd say they are obviously stronger than Peter, at least physically, maybe even the physically strongest alpha in the series sans la bet. When it comes to Kali, however, just like I portrayed her, it could honestly go either way, because she is just like Tristan in every way if you remove his blood control. In RPG stats, she'd be an assassin with high critical damage, while Peter would be a warrior with an overall balanced stat. Kali's strength here are mainly her speed, experience, and deadliness, which are exactly the same reason why Tristan survived fighting Peter twice. So yet. Dukalion. Kali Peter *, the twins if they combine. Ennis Derek. Ethan Aiden. Chapter 138, Chapter 134. Malia twisted and turned on the bed in discomfort as she tried to find the perfect spot without opening her eyes, but alas she couldn't, which caused Malia Tate to wake up irritated. Looking to her side, she found the reason, or lack of, for her discomfort. She wasn't cuddling with Tristan because Tristan wasn't on the bed. She grumbled in annoyance as this was the second night in a row that Tristan snuck out of bed in the middle of the night to do only God knows what. Luckily for her, just when she started getting up to go find Tristan and pull him back to bed to get her good night's sleep, the boy in question came back inside and paused as he locked gaze with her. Save it. We'll deal with whatever is up with you in the morning. Right now, I just want to sleep. Comfortably. She said before he could even get a word in. She was even keeping her eyes half open so that the sleep won't fully leave. With nothing else said, they both climbed the bed with Malia tightly latching on to Tristan just in case he tried to leave again and disturb her sleep. Tristan was in the kitchen very early in the morning flipping pancakes for his and Malia's breakfast while she got ready. She came down as soon as Tristan served the 2 plates of pancakes on the table with syrup, cream, and juice to go along with it. They ate in relative silence, at least for the first minute before Malia broke the tranquil silence with a complaint. Can you at least tell me what you go off to do at night and why I have to struggle with sleeping? She asked while stuffing her mouth with pancakes. Tristan smiled wryly, knowing he was partly to blame for that. I also have no idea. The night before was a full moon, maybe that might have something to do with it. Malia groaned audibly, worrying that this new development might become an unwanted habit. You do know that you can ponder whatever might be happening to you without having to leave the bed, right? Tristan could only chuckle at her words, aware that this was just her irritation speaking out. So? Malia inquired offhandedly. Figured anything out yet? Tristan's head tilted in confusion. About. Malia rolled her eyes at him and breathed out heavily with her head dropping to one side in a tired fashion. What else if not you, dumbass? Or did turning into an alpha, or its vampire equivalent, suddenly made you retarded? Tristan chuckled with a shrug and held up a finger for Malia to see the black claw growing out to an unnatural length before shrinking back. I feel kinda light. Also, everything else that I could do before suddenly feels a lot easier to do, that it almost feels like a subconscious thing at times, almost like blinking. What of your urges? Tristan closed his eyes for a bit before shaking his head. It's still there, but I can hardly feel it. Maybe it means I can go longer periods without blood. Weeks? Months? Maybe even years at a time with full drinks, who knows? Malia tapped her fork on her plate with an expression of slight worry on her face that she was quick to dismiss. Tristan just evolved to a vampire's version of an alpha werewolf, so of course there'll be some changes in him. I'm worrying about the wrong thing. Probably a result of my sleep being disturbed for 2 nights. She thought, choosing not to needlessly worry after slightly berating herself. As long as you're fine, Mr. Vampire Alpha. Her words were meant to tease him, but it backfired as soon as the words left her mouth. Ugh! I want to become an alpha too, damn it! Her mood was instantly soured. Tristan had nothing to say to that, so he just patted her on the back, but that only made her vent more. Damn it! That fucking bastard! She hit the table in anger. You'll have to help me catch that bastard so I can kill him, Trist. The bastard she was talking about was none other than Aiden, the irritatingly smug alpha who thought he was some kind of tough shit. Tristan nodded. Though I doubt we'll see them again in school. A valid point, and one that Malia didn't give two toots about. Doesn't matter. You'll help me kill him anytime he shows his face in front of me. Malia seethed. Aside from the fact that he'd want to kill them too if he saw them, Tristan could completely understand why she was this pissed off. Aiden was the only one not dead set on killing those they fought, which was Malia in this case, and yet she couldn't pull an advantage for herself. He then trounced her in moments after he pissed her off, with the only advantage she had during the fight was when she had lost her rationality, which he had quickly adapted to. The only thing that saved her ass was the distraction from Tristan and Allison's timely help. Being an alpha was a different ball game altogether, and even between alphas there existed visible differences. Hoping to compete on the same level as these alphas while still being a beta can be considered as either a stroke of foolishness or ignorance. Even Tristan in his fight against Callie was being pushed back at every turn, and the reason he was able to level the fighting field to get a coin flip chance of killing her was because of the venom he pumped into her when he sucked her blood. Even with all that, paralyzing her, draining her blood, and even Allison's help at the end, the chance of him killing her was 50% at best. Tristan had even realized that the only reason he could compete with Derek, who was an alpha, was most likely because he had been moments from draining Peter of his last ounce of blood when Derek had killed him and had inadvertently taken the spark for himself. He was left at the precipice of evolving higher, the step before the very tip, because the spark that was needed for the final push was lost to Derek. I don't think we need to worry about that for now. And besides, who knows whether if killing an alpha werewolf will make you an alpha wercoyote. Your species is just every bit as rare as mine, so like me, becoming an alpha might be different for you. Tristan's speculations doused Malia's stoked flames of vengeance to flickering simmers as that gave her something serious to think about. Humph. We'll figure it out later. We can even use him as an experiment for me to see if I can change if I kill an alpha wolf. Obviously, Malia was not one to allow herself be bothered by things that by all rights should bother her. They went back to their food and finished it before running along to school. As Tristan drove them to school, he heard Malia mumbling to herself. Such a waste too. Wouldn't it have been more better for me to kill Ennis than for Derek to do it? After all, he's already an alpha. Tristan sighed at Malia's whining that would most likely take a few days for her to accept it and no longer talk about it, at least until the next time she meets Aiden. School continued as usual with no surprises for the students and teachers to gossip on, except maybe the fact that two other people in town abruptly disappeared. During one of the breaks, Tristan had Malia direct him to Allison because he wanted to tell her something important. Thank you. Allison was rightfully confused for a brief moment before realization of why Tristan was thanking her dawned on her, and safe to say, she was a bit awkward not knowing how to respond to his thanks. He might have killed Callie, but also he knew just how much Allison's interference helped save his life. He and Callie could have pretty much died together, which was a very distasteful thought when he mused about it, but Allison's arrows helped decisively turn the struggle to his win. He was very grateful for that. Now it was his turn to be surprised, even if by a tiny bit, as Allison hugged him without letting him go until he reciprocated it. I'll admit hearing you say thank you is such a rare thing, but I'm more happy that you're alive. Don't sweat it, tough guy. She smiled at him and walked off after giving him a wink. See you later, Malia. Malia snorted. Now she finally notices that I'm here. How infuriating. It was all laughs and jokes for them and they were happy with it that way. Who knows when next they'll have to fight for their life. So small wholesome moments like these were sometimes the highlight of their current lives. I'm going to turn in some assignments. You coming? Malia asked, and with nothing to do, he nodded. Chapter 139, Chapter 135. A few weeks has passed since the Hale and Buddhist pack clashed against Dukalion's pack, even managing to kill his two oldest alphas and still being alive to tell it. A few other people turned up missing during the week, alerting the resident packs of Beacon Hills that someone was up to something and was very active with it. The most those concerned knew was that Dukalion and his pack had initially been hunting someone back to Beacon Hills, most likely the one behind people randomly disappearing. For the older ones, I.e. saw Tommy, Chris, and Derek. They more or less could hazard a few guesses on what was being done, and none of those guesses were game. Being the oldest one present, Satomi could already see the patterns drawing, not just from her own conjectures but also from the weird things that happened before the kidnapping started and also during the past few weeks. Tristan inexplicably waking up in the middle of the night and saying he felt something weird was also another point to note if one knew what they were looking for. Knowing the nature of events surrounding the disappearances, Satomi could only sigh as she was presented with only two choices: either call one of her oldest friends still alive, or speak with Alan Deaton. Those were the only options available as what was happening was of druidic nature. What else could warrant such attention from Deucalion if not a keeper of nature? The demon wolf was also the reason she was this invested in deaths. At this point, it could be said that their two packs were at war. Deucalion was not a forgiving man, he had long ceased to be such a person. And given what they witnessed during Tristan's ascension and the events that transpired between the two of them, Deucalion would likely kill Tristan if the boy continued refusing to join his pack. With the child being an alpha, she was sure his growth curve from here on would only be ridiculous, especially with the few discoveries he's made ever since becoming an alpha. A/N, Tristan will also be called an alpha instead of something like a sire or primogenitor. I did my research and basically the term alpha is not exclusive to just wolves. It's a broad term, if anything else, to describe someone at top of a group or community. Now having an alpha under her was already surprising enough, but an alpha vampire? Deucalion POV. He might have miscalculated a little bit but the end result was still a pleasing experience. He had factored in the likelihood of Ennis dying to Derek Hale, but what he didn't expect was Callie dying at the boy's hands. Whether or not he was helped at the end was inconsequential as the boy had done more than expected by weakening Callie down to a level he could contend with on equal grounds. A vampire. Now an alpha. A light chuckle left his mouth. And now he's on the board. You will have to make a choice sooner or later, Tristan. We all will. Speaking to that point, the air around him turned stern as he remembered the reason for his most recent troubles. A half-dead druid. Pesky things. You better hurry up your sacrifices, Julia. Because unlike Callie, my claws never fail to reap out my prey's life. His voice sounded distorted as he spoke while the glasses he wore shone with a dim red hue. Having quickly acclimated to the change of status to an alpha, Tristan's next move was figuring out just what being an alpha vampire entailed. While the added strength was always a nice sensation, he knew that wasn't even part of his added abilities as an alpha. The first thing he noticed was how easily he could now move and manipulate it. Now he could make it even harder than it was during his fight with Callie, quite easy too he might add. Boosted senses and physique, along with better control, were his basic abilities, so it was quite obvious that they'd all receive an enhancement. So after testing them out for a bit, Tristan delved in deeper and what he found made him feel as if the world was finally listening to his silent complaints. Compulsion. He could command people with his words. So far it has only worked on humans, but he fervently hoped that it'll grow strong to the point that he would then be able to compel even supernatural creatures. Turns out that Lydia is also a supernatural creature, so he couldn't compel her to keep quiet. The only downside of the ability he's found so far. Compulsion to the side, he somehow gained the ability to call crows and ravens to flock towards him. It was a bit strange for him at first when crows started flocking to their house every night and following him around anytime he left the house, but he was able to quickly figure it out. Faster than he even did when trying out the limits of his compulsion. He had no clue on how calling crows could be useful, but he wasn't complaining. Hopefully he'll find a productive use of that ability down the line. The next thing on the list were his poisonous claws. Though not as potent as his fangs, the effect of the paralytic poison his claws now carried was visibly effective. Thankfully, it was something he could tune on and off, even slightly lowering the potency. It was also because of his poisonous claws that made him discover another of his new abilities. Like one could imagine, without knowing how dangerous his claws were now, he'd mistakenly poisoned Malia one time when they got handsy. He had almost broken down in panic when Malia had turned stiff and then silent after a few minutes until he looked up at her. The first thing he did was to suck her blood to know what was wrong with her, an action that left him flabbergasted because while he could feel something paralytic in her system, it disappeared as soon as he swallowed the blood. Lost and left with no other available options other than completely draining her blood and feeding him with hers, he bit his wrist and forced his blood down her throat as a test run, since whatever paralyzed her seemed to have no effect on him. Long story short, with the discovery of his poisoned claws came also the discovery of the healing properties his blood now possessed. Allison and Lydia were more than ecstatic to test that out, Well, not Lydia but Allison pressured her into it, and so they did. He guessed that seeing your wound closing up with a speed your eye can follow was a novel experience to normal humans, with how stunned the two girls were when they saw the small cut they made close up in seconds. During all this, Satomi gave him a little warning concerning his fangs, which also changed after becoming an alpha. Unlike his more pronounced single pair of canines on both sides of his mouth before becoming an alpha, now almost all his fangs were canines, with both sides of his mouth now accommodating 3 canine pairs each that were more jutted out and pronounced than the others. According to Satomi, new alphas are sometimes overcome by instinct or an overwhelming desire that most times than not they end up succumbing to it and sire a beta without meaning to. Basically, he had to watch out for his fangs, equivalent of the urge to impregnate a girl that everyone has at some point during S**X. The extra tidbit that an alpha biting another supernatural creature with the intent to sire them under him would definitely kill them was all the reason for caution Tristan needed, given how the only one he bit was Malia. With how he was training to get his abilities to work on command and the addition of Satomi's warning, Malia had to bear over a week of abstinence until Tristan got his poison under control and stopped it from acting up on its own at random times. All in all, without the presence of Dandelion hovering round him and triggering his instincts to act aggressively, Tristan had a few weeks of calm that helped him focus fully on his new abilities and keeping his now broader emotional spectrum in check. Retraining his emotions to be kept in check brought back some fond memories of when Satomi had given him the bite. With Satomi, Allison's father, and Derek working, separately, to find out the perpetrator of the kidnappings, serial murder at this point, the high school teens were able to rewind a bit and temporarily focus on their teenage lives. Isaac and Erica returned to school, much to Boyd's excitement, along with someone new, Cora Hale, Derek's younger sister. She was only in school because Derek had turned into a paranoid alpha and wanted all his betas together at all times. Finding out his sister had been alive all these years and then held hostage along with his beta to force his submission stirred up something fierce inside the Hale alpha. In other words, a normal few weeks for the residents of Beacon Hills, human and supernatural. Chapter 140, Chapter 136. Drib. 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 Tristan woke up to the systematic sound of a dripping faucet and groggily pushed himself off his bed to get started with the day. Test day, another bane of his teenage life. Except, the hell is this? Blood. Everywhere. He looked at the bed behind him and all it was an elevated platform of flowing blood. Everywhere he turned to look at was a waterfall of blood. Out of curiosity, he touched the bed of blood and licked his finger, looking genuinely confused about everything. For some reason, the sea of blood around him did nothing to tickle his hunger. Not even a tingle of his tongue. It looked like blood. It tasted like blood. His instincts told him it was blood, but for some reason it just didn't incite any hunger in him to drink from it. Knowing nothing and having no idea on what to do, he started walking forward with his path of direction being where the sea of blood seems to be flowing to. All he could hear was the occasional dripping sound of blood, yet he couldn't figure out where the dripping sound was coming from. For some inexplicable reason, as he continued walking, the blood started flowing faster and his heartbeat banged against his chest as if warning of a malicious forebode. Malia. Grandma? Brett. He didn't know when he broke off into a sprint and started yelling out names that his hearing couldn't even pick up due to the resounding clash of waves that swept away every other sound, except the constantly dripping sound that was now discordant as akin to the loud chime of a bell. The closer he got, the more his screams increased, but he heard none of it. Gasp! His eyes shot open in fright and his first instinct, being to escape out of whatever hellish nightmare that was, kicked in and he lashed out at the smallest sense of threat. He heard things crashing but all his eyes seemed to see was waterfall of red clouding his eyes, and when he about to lash out again just for the slight reprieve of being able to take another measured breath of air, the red clouding his eyes started receding and he could now hear and see the little sounds and specks of light of his environment. Unfortunately, he wasn't given the joy of being finally awake before something tackled him to the ground. Before he could react, a searing pain tore through his brain that forcefully and excruciatingly brought him back to reality. Huff. 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 Tristan. Look at me. Forgetting the pain from his broken shoulders, Tristan's focus was entirely on the person who was pressing him to the ground. Asterisk huff. Huff asterisk. Brett. Look at me. Look at me. You're okay. You're okay. Brett said calmly as they locked eyes with each other until Tristan slowly nodded. Malia. Where's Malia? He asked frantically. Ugh, you bastard. Did you have to hit me that hard? Malia's voice sounded out in pained groans as she stood up holding her bleeding head. Seeing Malia, Tristan finally realized the bloodied state of everyone in the room, even him. There were splashes of blood all over the bed, walls, and ceiling. Brett had 3 long claw marks running down his arm and a thick long gash on his back, while Malia had a bleeding head and a busted shoulder. Tristan's wounds and broken shoulders quickly healed up as his breathing got in order, unlike Brett's and Malia's. Just the state they were in told Tristan everything that had happened, but he asked nonetheless with a regretful voice and a hand over his face. What happened? Before he could get any reply, Tristan found himself being yanked up by Malia, who didn't give him the time to speak out any sort of apology and suckered punch him straight in the face. Arg! I guess I fully deserved that. You guess? Malia angrily glared at him, an expression that was rarely ever directed at Tristan, which made him feel even worse for it. You tried ripping your heart out. Not just Tristan, even Brett was stunned. Unlike Malia, who woke up due to Tristan's erratic movement and labored breaths as he slept, Brett had hurried over after hearing Malia's shouting at Tristan and the loud crashing sounds that followed. What? Was the only thing Tristan could say. You tried to rip out your fucking heart out, Tristan. How the hell else am I supposed to put it, hey? She shouted angrily at Tristan, who was too stunned to say anything else. Like a robot, his head crankily looked down at his chest, and though the wounds had closed, the claw marks on his shirt and his blood on his hands verified what would have been a nightmarish reality. Tristan, what happened? It obviously was a nightmare, but how exactly nightmarish was it that you wanted to rip out your own heart? Brett asked, seeing how only he was in the right mind to ask the important questions. Oh, he was frightened by what Malia said, but that made it much more important to know what Tristan must have seen to make his subconscious react in such a violent way, like choosing to end his life instead of just forcing him awake. But Tristan only shook his head with a blank look on his face and replied. Nothing. Just blood. What? He said it again. All I could see was blood, which was probably mine, but something about it felt like everything was dying. Malia interjected, earning the stare of the 2 boys. That was all I could feel from you when I woke up. It was suffocating to say the least. She clarified. Shit. Was all Brett and Tristan could say, though, for entirely different reasons. Has something like this ever happened since you became an alpha? Brett inquired, which led both teens to shake their heads. Maybe my emotions going haywire or randomly waking up at night, yes, but nothing like this. The distraught vampire got up and walked over to Malia to envelope her in a hug to calm her nerves. Even now, he couldn't think of anything about the dream that should have warranted such an extreme response from him. Was the dream that scary? He thought. The feeling he got while awake and the one he felt when sleeping were vastly different, that the latter felt somewhat of a distant memory. It's okay, I'm fine. Malia whispered, but it wasn't until after 3 minutes passed before she released her arms around him. Brett didn't pay much attention to them and just focused on his wounds and healed them by the time they let go of each other. Okay guys, get cleaned up so we can go. He said as he stood up. What's with the look? Like it or not, but you're both over your heads with Tristan being an alpha, so yes, I'm dragging your asses to Satomi. They weren't opposed to meeting Satomi like Brett was thinking. The look of reluctance on their faces had been their wish not to burden Satomi even further now that she was fully at odds with Decalion. Whatever happened that day had remained between the 2 older alphas, and not even when Tristan and Malia asked out of curiosity had Satomi told them, but they knew that the 2 alphas were now at odds. Thankfully for them, only a few of Satomi's pack were young, given that the old alpha was not in the business of turning people to betas. Most of the young betas in the pack were invited into the pack when they were already betas, like Brett, Lori, and Zhang, meaning any chance of Decalion attacking would be easily found out. So to burden Satomi with Tristan's issue, which she would likely have no answers for, while it made the 2 teens sympathetic, they knew that they were over their heads at this point. Alan Deaton's Animal Clinic. Alan bowed his head slightly towards Satomi as he welcomed her into his clinic. I figured I'd be hearing from you soon, Satomi-san. Hopefully it's something I can help with. He said, and then turned to Scott to excuse him for their private discussion, but Satomi shook her head. He can stay. He is, in a way, related to why I'm here today. She threw a pouch at Deaton that he caught. He opened it and took out what was inside, and in it was a piece of wood that had a symbol carved into it. Deaton chuckled wryly. This, Satomi-san, I'm afraid what you're looking for is not something I can help you with given my current profession. Though she rarely ever smiled, especially to outsiders, a trait Tristan had copied from her, the current expressionless look on her face unnerved both Deaton and Scott. "I am not here for your current profession, dear Alan." She started calmly and clearly. "Someone from your previous order is doing something in Beacon Hills that's affecting the natural order and has inadvertently involved my children in their vendetta against the demon wolf. The lines between what was and what is has already been blurred, Alan." Deaton sighed, wondering just why he had to deal with alphas at this point of his life. Peter, Derek, Satomi, Decalion, and pretty soon Tristan and Scott, flip the sign at the door, will you? Chapter 141, Chapter 137. Derek Hale POV. In the empty loft of this building, other than the ticking clock and the slightly drizzle clattering against the skylight, memories flashed through my head in images and painful sensations, all of them a collection of my long past and recent failures. With the natural symphony playing around me as a therapeutic stimulation, I punched the wrapped pillar in room as a make-do punching bag as I vented out the dark emotions in my mind. Laura. My sister who got killed by my own delirious uncle, my best friend, and then was sawn in half as a bait to bring me back to Beacon Hills. Isaac and Erica. My first betas, both choose as a medium to protect myself and to re-establish the Hale pack, only for me to lose them to a deranged racist old man who tortured them for his own sick pleasure and had me watch him and would sometimes even replay recordings of their screams just to get a rise out of me. Cora. My little sister who, for the past 6 years and counting, I thought had burned in the fire. What would have been a heartening reunion turned into her torture after she was captured by Decalion when she tried returning back to Beacon Hills after hearing of the re-emergence of an Hale pack. And then I lost Erica again, almost lost Isaac too, and subjected her to another torture under Decalion. Failure after failure. An alpha that couldn't even protect one of his beta and found it hard to stand against another alpha. Even amongst alphas, am I this pathetically weak? Now Decalion is coming after Scott and here I am conflicted on what to do. Leave, shamefully run away, or stay and fight, risking the lives of all my betas and my sister in a matter of pride. I'm fine letting you punch away for as much as you like if it means ending you being constantly grumpy, but at this point you'll just bring down the whole building. My fist stopped just inches away from the pillar as I took in slow breaths to calm the bundle of heat in my body. Did I wake you up? Cora snorted with a mild glare. You think I could sleep with all that slamming you've been doing for hours? Now that she mentioned it, I looked at the time and saw that 5 hours had gone by with the time now being a few minutes after 11 p.m. Sigh. I'm sorry. It's just that I've been troubled by a lot of things. She rolled her eyes and patted beside her for me to sit down and when I did, she took my hands and started unwrapping the cloth tied around it. I can't even begin to imagine what you have to deal with but I can't tell that it's not good. I can't even tell you to rely on us because if we are being realistic, we really have no way of helping you. There. I threw my hand around her and drew her in before she could make any protest and held her in there until her futile resistance melted away. Are you trying to cheer me up or to make yourself depressed again? I asked with a fine smile on my face as I softly brushed her hair. It was something I had no recollection of ever doing to her and I could feel her stiff awkwardness but I didn't care. MMN. Just trying to be a voice of reason. She muttered softly. Got any reasonable tips for me then? I asked jokingly and she turned quiet for a brief moment before saying something that I've been contemplating for weeks now. Why can't we just leave, Derek? It was a heartfelt question from her part, I understood, but for me the answer was in no way an easy choice to make. I gave her my other hand to untie the wraps while my freed hand idly combed through her hair. It's not that easy for me, Cora. She hummed. Because of Scott, right? She asked and I nodded with a sigh. Scott was just one of the reasons, one of the big ones in fact, why I still find it hard to just pack up and leave Beacon Hills. Erica and Isaac are more than happy enough to leave Beacon Hills as soon as I mention the word, but Scott is different. His entire life is rooted in Beacon Hills and he can't just leave it behind, not when it means leaving his mother, his friends and all the people he has grown up with. And I'm thinking you don't like the idea of having Satomi take him under her protection, right? I could only let out a wry chuckle at that question. Choices and decisions. Each more complicated than the one before. I felt Cora standing up and giving me a reassuring tap on my shoulders. You know, it's kinda cool that you, my very own brother, are now in Alpha. And as much as I would love to drag you away from this cursed place, I'll stick around with my Alpha, until the point where I feel like he's over his head and at that point I don't care if I have to drug you and stuff you in the trunk of my car, I will drag your ass out of Beacon Hills. I laughed as she left me with that. I'll hold you to that. It was a respite I very much needed, but not one that made choosing between my options any easier. Elias' house. Brett drove Tristan and Malia to Elias' house where Satomi was waiting for them. She has been moving around more frequently than she normally did, and while everyone took notice, no one said anything. The tension within the pack wasn't thick or anything of the sorts because of the safety Satomi assured them. Unlike Derek, the experienced alpha was not afraid of Dukalion. While that in no way suggested who was stronger between the two of them, it made the pack members live without pressure with the relative sense of security and trust they had in Satomi. I swear, Tristan. You've caused my old bones more exercise in the last few months than they got in the last 10 years. Elias joked in an old-fashioned good-hearted elderly way as he saw how awkwardly skittish the boy was when they came in. It was a commendably worthy thing how the boy could remain calm in the most strenuous and life-threatening situations, but at the end of the day one had to remember that he was nothing but a teenager who has experienced life for less than half number of years he has been alive. The door to the house opened and Satomi came in with a guest. Elias. Hope you're in good health. Deaton greeted the old man who just smiled and waved it off. As much good health as my age can afford me, he said while fumbling with the remote control to switch the channels on the TV screen. I see. All is good then, Deaton said, before turning to Tristan who was absent-mindedly rapidly tapping his feet against the floor. How's life as an alpha vampire been for you, Tristan? Satomi-san told me what happened and insisted I come along. Tristan exhaled listlessly and recounted what had happened, bringing frowns to the faces of the adults. What do you think, Alan? Satomi asked. Deaton looked at all of them present and started. It can be a few things, honestly speaking. As an alpha, your senses are more attuned to nature in a way that surpasses that of any other creature not of the same level. It could be that your subconscious is reacting to something it has already perceived, something so dreadful that you would rather kill yourself than experience it again in any way. So some sort of psychic precognition? It could be given his empathetic senses. Satomi supplemented. Deaton nodded. You're right. Some texts describe vampires as harbingers of death, bringing rains of blood and terror to anywhere they pass through. He then added another point of consideration. It could also be that the inner consciousness of his vampire side is trying to tell him something given his growing instincts, especially now that he had evolved, and the duller part of his subconscious is rejecting it. A clash of subconscious personalities. Why would my subconscious be in conflict? Tristan asked. At this, Deaton looked at Satomi before looking at Tristan. It is probably because you have not grown as a vampire, given how you've been living and emulating the lifestyle of werewolves, at least to a certain extent. It's like this, one part of your subconscious has gotten used to the fact that like other members of your pack, you should exhibit the same traits like them such as howling, running on all fours, or maybe even going through an emotional instability during the full moon, which doesn't have that effect on vampires as much as I know of, and maybe a few others. All hypothetical by the way. The entire room could only look on silently at Deaton who was doing his best to tell what he knew of. Anything else? Satomi asked after Deaton finished speaking but looked as if he wanted to say something. Deaton scratched his head, not comfortable with what he wanted to say but knew he had to say it. I'm afraid it's a bit intrusive, Satomi-san. Say your mind, Alan. I was the one who asked for your aid. Getting her go-ahead, Deaton's face gained a solemn cast as he spoke. It is something that has been bothering me concerning Tristan's words and reaction to certain events before they happen, like sensing the unnatural air when Peter went on a rampage, when the Alpha Pack attacked Erica, the crows at the school, and also how he said he sometimes randomly wakes up at night. Satomi could already tell where Deaton was going with this, but she didn't say anything and let him continue. I can confidently tell you that a vampire like Tristan, even vampires in general, have the loosest connection to nature given their abominable though obscured origin, which makes it even interesting given that you visited me out of the blue a few years back when we first sensed the shift in the energy lines flowing through Beacon Hills. It's a hypothetical thought of mine, but I feel that Tristan's past has something to do with this. He can very well be the very thing the change in the lines is fighting against. Chapter 142, Chapter 138. Do you know anything about Tristan's past or his origins, Satomi-san? Deaton asked carefully with a hint of caution. Satomi on the other hand only shook her head slowly. I have no knowledge of his past, his origins, or any single idea of how his life had been until I found him. Well, him and the little lass over there. There was nothing to tell, so there was nothing to safeguard. This confused Deaton and his answer came in from Elias before he could ask the bothering question in his head. From the day Satomi brought them back, the boy had no memories of his past. Hell, he had no memory of anything. Even his basic instincts as a human were severely lacking. Deaton's surprise elicited a laugh from Elias with how floored he looked. It was my bite that turned Tristan into a vampire. Satomi said, and Deaton's eyes lit up in understanding as he caressed his chin in contemplation. He spared a glance at Tristan and a few conclusions came to him almost immediately. I see. Though rare, an alpha's bite can trigger the innate nature of a person instead of turning them to a werewolf. Is there any reason for digging into my unknown past? For all we know, I might have been a poor child suffering from amnesia or something similar. Tristan commented offhandedly to the side, not actually thrilled about the idea of someone trying to dig up his past. It was like he said, he might have been one of the millions of helpless children all over the world, and meeting Malia must have been the best decision his child self made. What he wasn't comfortable with was the little probability that there was something behind the veil, and with the emergence of it would mean forming a connection with a past he never cared much for. What if he had a life, parents, friends, family, or maybe even a terrible traumatic experience that locked away his memories? It might seem heartless, but he'd rather the past remain as obscure, unknown, and unimportant as it has always been growing up. Deaton gave a light smile in understanding. I think it's plain for all to see that you'd rather your current life have nothing to do with your past. Quite obvious, I would say. The druidic, former, veterinarian nodded and left it at that. Like I said, it's all hypothetical and conjectures on my part. Is there a chance of something like this happening again? Malia asked what she deemed the most important question that everyone had somehow missed, for some unknown reason. The doctor shrugged, being as clueless as everyone else was on the main matter. I have no idea or any form of assurance to give you on that. Malia huffed in disappointment, feeling almost fed up with how many walls they seemed to be hitting when it came to things concerning Tristan. Deaton asked Tristan a few simple questions just to check up on his state as an alpha before turning back to Satomi. His emotions are stable and there's no fluctuations in his state of mind to make his abilities and physical strength go out of control. He's doing all right for an alpha at his age as much as I can tell, so I'll be going back now given there is nothing much I can do at this point. It's all right, Alan. And thank you for your suggestions. Satomi thanked him, after which he left. This is getting annoying with every passing day, Malia said, looking thoroughly frustrated by all the spontaneous episodes she's had to deal with ever since Tristan became an alpha. Brett, would you and Lori mind spending the next few days over with these two troublesome children? Satomi asked Brett, who had been quietly sitting on the stairs since before Deaton came in. Brett gave her a thumbs up. No problem. Ironically, how Tristan's the one we are keeping an eye on instead of Malia. Haha, real funny there, hotshot. A sarcastically dry reply was what Malia gave to Brett's words, which made him laugh even harder. The next few nights passed, and luckily for those tasked with keeping an eye on him, Tristan didn't have any violent episodes again, nor did he wake up randomly at night and disturbed Malia's sleep, much to the coyote's boundless happiness. Tristan, what's up, man? Boyd's boisterous voice didn't fail in trapping the pale teen's attention as it was intended. You are being unnaturally cheerful and loud this early in the morning. Tristan dully noted, but Boyd just smirked at him. I guess you're not going to ask me why, right? Boyd asked as he threw an arm over Tristan's shoulders. Tristan gave him one of his trademark blank stares. I explicitly did not ask that question for obvious reasons. Boyd laughed at his friend's antics, his smirk growing more patronizing at Tristan's perceived misfortune. I kinda asked Erica out and she's down for it, he said. Tristan showed no reaction whatsoever to the big reveal. I guess that's a mission accomplished for you. Boyd groaned as they walked into the cafeteria that was, as usual, crowded with students. Just how thin is your emotional spectrum? It's hard to differentiate between sarcasm and nonchalance with you, was his complaint as they sat down after getting their food. Tristan shrugged as he ate an apple. Good sarcasm is hard to differentiate from normal speech. Okay, what is it? You're being more irritable than usual, and I doubt it's Allison or Lydia, so what's up with you? Boyd asked Tristan while giving him a pointed stare. Tristan tilted his head very slightly as he returned Boyd's stare. Hey! How could you tell? His reason for asking was simply because he felt like Boyd was seeing through his expressions with too much ease as of recent. Boyd scoffed as he munched on his grub. I'm like your only male friend in this school, Tristan, just as the way you're mine. It'd be pretty lame if I couldn't read your face given how much you use it for communication instead of your mouth. Tristan paused for a second, thought it over, and then nodded. I guess that makes sense. But don't worry about me, what about your date with Erica? I thought you weren't interested. I'm not. It's called changing the subject, you idiot. Tristan replied. Oh God. I hate it when you're being a smart ass. It's frustratingly repulsive to me 100% of the time. Hey guys. Allison barely managed a greeting before her body slipped into the seat and rested her head on Tristan's shoulders. Let me rest for a bit. What's happening with you, Allison? You look like you haven't slept a wink in 2 days. Boyd exclaimed upon seeing how drowsy and weary her eyes were. Allison's voice was barely above a whisper at the point. It's because I haven't gotten one. Tristan looked at her but she just grumbled for him to stay put so she could enjoy her small rest. Under Boyd's astonished gaze, Tristan took his other apple and started slicing them to diced pieces and slid it in front of Allison. Eat. You look like you're dying from blood loss with how pale you look. I'm supposed to be the vampire here and I look more healthy than you. She chuckled with a groan while Boyd just watched with mirth in his eyes at the dynamic between the two of them. You know, if I didn't know any better I'd have said that the both of you were dating. Boyd commented and laughed at how Tristan behaved as if he didn't hear what he said, while Allison almost choked on her apples and flipped him off. Just like he had been that morning, Tristan left the table and went back into his head to continue going over the opinions Deaton had laid down concerning him. The more he thought about it, he realized that Deaton's hypothesis on him being connected to nature in an abnormal way looked more plausible than the others. What's up with the princess? Erica came in with Cora in tow and sat beside Boyd who almost let out a goofy out-of-place smile but schooled it in when he felt Tristan's eyes on him. Hey Tristan! Cora called out to him at the same time that Lydia arrived. Please stay a little longer. Allison quickly held him down along with a plea as soon as she felt he was about to get up and leave. She felt like if he left now, she would outright faint from losing the last smidgen of comfort she's gotten in the last few days. What's up with both of them? Are they trying to set Malia off? Lydia pointed at Allison's wretched form leaning on Tristan while helping herself to Allison's apple slices. Beats me. Tristan on the other hand was fed up. Can't they just understand? Yes, he had a very strong control over his impulses but having all these people all around him most of the time tickled on his urge to sink his fangs into them. Even Allison, who he was used to, still sometimes catches him off guard. The collective obliviousness they all had made the urge more tantalizing, making Tristan deal with the never-ending frustration at the end of every day. Normal life of an everyday teenager vampire. Chapter 143, Chapter 139. Decalion stood against the two last alphas of his pack and none of the nervousness and uncertainty that plagued the twins affected him. Are we still doing this? We haven't found her yet and Ennis and Callie are dead. Aiden complained, his worry laid bare for them to see. Instead of answering, Decalion tilted his head to give him a lopsided stare and asked a question in reply. Are you scared? The twin bristled at the stare while the main recipient, Aiden, shifted uncomfortably in his position. No. He ended up saying. Good. Decalion nodded good-naturedly to himself. Fear isn't something we feel as alphas, because the only thing that can make us afraid is when we are close to death. Needless to say, his words didn't do much to help the mental state of the young twins. Another grim fact of the matter was that there was nothing either of them could do. They had enemies everywhere, even here in Beacon Hills, the dark druid who was hell-bent on killing the whole pack, and the worrying alliance of 3 alphas between the Buddhist pack and the Hale pack. The worst part was that they were the ones who stoked the flames that were now their enemies. It wasn't something they considered when they were the feared pack of 5 alphas, but now that they were down to just the 2 of them, the pressure they were feeling pressing down on their lives suddenly magnified. So what are we to do from now on? Ethan asked. The lopsided stare Decalion gave them turned into a contented smile. Easy. We go for the witch. Everything else can come after that. And the vampire. We'll get him when we need him. No need to rush, after all, it's not like he has that much of a choice. His words were both ominous and cryptic, but neither of the twins bothered asking him for an explanation. Of all the avenues they had, Decalion was the safest to be by considering that they were blood enemies of the 2 resident alpha packs in Beacon Hills. Concerning the witch, how do we find her? Ethan asked, changing the subject to something he was more comfortable with. The person he was asking the question continued tapping his cane against the ground with the same tempo as a ticking clock, which only served to terrify the twins more. Why, we will follow the trail she leaves, of course. The rituals. General POV. So it's called a threefold death ritual? Tristan asked, promoting the 4 people around him to nod. And you think they are targeting virgins only? I don't think so. Styles banged his head against a pillar in frustration. Oh, come on. It's gotta be, right. The only thing we have correct is the method the killer is using, and I doubt the music teacher who got his throat slit was a virgin. Allison pointed out, earning nods from Malia and Lydia. It's 5 people dead so far, and from what we know, only the first 3 were virgins. I think it's safe to assume that the threefold death is the method while the main sacrifice is something else. Allison added. Maybe at least try to find out the similarities between the last 2 sacrifices, that might give us a clue on what the new criteria is. Lydia said. I think your best bet would be asking the vet if he knows anything about the sacrifices. Tristan suggested. In the first place, he had no idea why Styles came to them with this. If I'm right and someone demented is out there killing innocent virgins, I'm not dying, you hear me? Styles informed passionately as he left them to find another avenue to secure his poor innocent virgin life. Things are kinda getting scary, don't you think? Lydia said, asking no one in particular. Scary was like 5 months ago, Lydia. Allison remarked and then turned to Tristan. Why the vet? If he knew something, wouldn't he have said so? Satomi met with him, right? Yes, but he didn't say anything he knew. The important bits at least. He's an expert in avoiding telling the truth. Why would he do that? Hell if I know. What's important isn't the method of the sacrifice, but the patterns it is carried out in. He elaborated. Lydia pursed her lips at Tristan's choice of words. What makes you so sure that it'll follow a pattern? Tristan paused and looked between Allison and Lydia, briefly wondering why he had to be the one to point it out when they were the 2 smartest people he knew in his friend group. They are just getting me to talk at this point. Probably because that's how sacrifices are carried out. The methods are crucial, but different types of sacrifices are done for different things. Lydia snapped her fingers and wore a mystery-solved smirk. That means if we figure out the pattern, then we can find out what kind of ritual this person is performing. Right. Tristan jabbed a finger towards the direction Styles left in. There's no we, as in me or Malia, in that statement. If you want to figure that out, you should have followed Stilinski. Seriously? Lydia looked in between shock and disbelief. You're not even remotely curious about who's causing the sacrifices and why it's been done. Tristan only had so much as to say to a frequently repeated topic that he didn't bother explaining his reasoning to Lydia and just left. Something up with him? Allison directed at Malia, who just shrugged in response. Honestly, I expected it, but I thought you guys would be more, I don't know, gung-ho about finding out the root of all this given tension between the packs here in Beacon Hills. Malia gave Allison a half-lidded glare which made Allison confused. What? You know, for all the socially awkward vibe he has going on, Tristan has his own way of caring, and it just so happens that no one knows when he does it. Others might be oblivious to it, but how could Malia be? Tristan being an alpha only made the complications worse, much worse for him than anyone had an idea of. The saying that there cannot be 2 kings of the mountain rang truer here than anywhere else. It could be my misconception, but that hag is really trying to make an alpha out of Tristan, isn't she? Truthfully, it wasn't anything that serious as kicking them off the pack or anything of that nature, but neither of the both of them really embodied the aspect of the Buddhist pack. Not even a smidgen of it after years of living with Satomi. A case could be made in Tristan's case, but then his passiveness could be attributed to a learned habit, something he was now growing out of. I know that. It's just that it's sometimes hard to picture him that way with how he normally reacts. Isn't that right, Allison? Lydia asked Allison, who could only absent-mindedly nod her head as her thoughts went over Malia's words. Upon leaving the girls, Tristan made his way to the guidance counselor office and knocked as he got to the door. Yes, come in. He heard from the other side of the door. Mr. Hayes, what a pleasant surprise. Do you need me for something? What are you? Excuse me. A supernatural. What are you? An abrupt confrontation, one that Marin Morrill never expected. And the worst part was that she couldn't play it off with a riddle or a clever retort, not when Tristan's red eyes were staring at her. And might I know what brought this passive-aggressive confrontation on? She closed the folder she had been working on and returned Tristan's stare. You know too much, he said, coming to stand in front of her, and I don't. She folded her hands and replied Tristan with the same seriousness as his eyes went back to normal. That doesn't say anything. It shouldn't, because I'm saying it. What do you know about the sacrifices? Tristan asked again. This was one of those times where Tristan was prone to act without thinking. Right now, his acclamation as an alpha was taking a completely different route than anything he had expected, and coupled with the obvious convergence of recent events to a focal that he would no doubt be at the point of, no one could really force him for trying to deviate in away from his usual thought processes and actions, his own unique way of teenage rebelliousness, so to speak. Seeing the steel eyes the young teen looked at her with, Marin Morel sighed and gestured to the door behind them. Mind closing it before you take a seat? I assure you, I don't know much more than you already know, even less sure about some of the things I know. Tristan took his seat in front of her, his eyes never leaving hers for even a moment. So what are you sure of? 2 things. 1, I am not your enemy. She said with a little smile and held her fingers up in gesture. And second, I am not the one behind the killings. Chapter 144, Chapter 140. But that's not what you came here to listen to, is it? This was a surprising deviation from the barebones plan she had laid out, but it couldn't be said that it was a bad thing, all things considered. And what will it take for you to answer me? Tristan said, completely ignoring her words and outright preventing himself from falling into her flow. If one were to ask Tristan what led up to this decision of his, all he could say was that it was something he felt like doing. The counselor sighed at Tristan's persistence, and though she didn't know what brought it on, she knew she had to address it rather than playing it off. Know this, regardless of what I tell you, true or false, know that I can't and will not help you, or your pack in extension, in any way. This is not a board where my participation. Before she could finish her sentence, Tristan had interjected by cutting her off. No offense, but is this a shrink thing? What thing? The whole talk thing where you never answer the question. And no, I didn't mean anything rude by that. The two of them held a harmless stare for a few seconds before Ms. Morel broke it off with an amused laugh when it turned out that Tristan truly wasn't trying to be sarcastic or anything else his words might have sounded like except for what it was. Well, nothing like that. Though I won't lie and say it's a much-needed social skill in this line of work. She said, and as for your question, I'm not a supernatural creature. I'm fully human, a special type, but human nonetheless. Druid then. Tristan remarked, somewhat understanding what she was trying to say. Seeing no other reason to skirt the topic, she nodded her head but held out a hand to stop Tristan from saying more. As for the identity of the person behind the sacrifices, I can only tell you that I can't help you in that front because I don't know who they are. That's a lie. Once more were a pair of cold eyes staring down. Yes, their conversation has been civil from the beginning, but as far as Tristan was concerned, they were not on the same side. Ms. Morel stopped and looked at Tristan, this time with a small frown on her face that soon mellowed out into impassiveness. He's an alpha now, and not just any alpha. A vampiric alpha, a primarch if nothing else. I don't think you understand. She started. If you are not going to say the truth, then don't speak at all. Tristan's eyes bore in Ms. Morel's, and the red of his eyes glowed a tone brighter as a wave of compulsion spread out from it involuntarily. Ms. Morel felt the wave that came with a feeling of tiny needles pricking at her head. Compulsion already. He's growing fast despite his lack of the sufficiently required amount of blood. Her thoughts revolving around Tristan were a mystery to everyone, including Tristan, not that he cared all that much for her thoughts, and only she knew her reasons for it. Whoever said ignorance is bliss has to be one of the most ignorant men of his time. It's not a lie, at least not the way I meant it to be. She started. I knew her once upon a time, or at least who she used to be. As for who she is now, I have no idea. Tristan nodded. It wasn't a full truth, he knew that. Satomi always said something along the lines of observing the rules of war. He could push for more answers, uncaring if the passive aggression turned full aggression, but not until he hears what he wants to hear. Dekalion. Are you his emissary? A positive answer to this was a ticket to full aggression from Tristan. Ms. Morel sighed. Yes. Tristan said nothing else and stood up from his seat, leaving for the door, but was stopped by Ms. Morel's words. Dekalion must be stopped, that is what I want. If no one does it, then believe me when I say this, Dekalion will be the end of all that you love. Whatever it was she expected him to say or to follow up with were not the words her ears received, given how slack-jawed his response had left her. And so? Do you want me to kill Dekalion or what? I'm just a slightly better 17-year-old boy, you remember that, right? Again, his words could be read as sarcastic, but the way he said it made it anything but. And dumbfounded was how Marin Morrill watched Tristan leave her office before letting out a pearl of chuckles. Oh dear. I think you're right. Children like you shouldn't be worried about our mistakes. Unfortunately, that is not to be. After leaving the guidance counselor's office, Tristan came across his science teacher, Adrian Harris. Hayes, just the man I was looking for. Me. Tristan pointed to himself and let out an inaudible groan as he saw Mr. Harris nod. Your grade in the sciences is falling behind, and while I understand you are an ace of the lacrosse team, I will be forced to bring this up with Coach Finstock if this persists. Are we understood? Loud and clear. Escaping Harris, Tristan pondered what he had gleaned from his brief talk with Ms. Morrill. While he didn't ask as many questions as he wanted to, the scant answers he had gotten from her helped ease up the complications that were brewing in his head. Right now, with him and Derek on the side of the Buddhist pack, they had the momentum over Decalion, no matter how powerful the old werewolf might be. The twins might be stronger than any single alpha when joined together, but that didn't explicitly mean that they needed only alphas to fight them. Being jumped by an alpha and a few betas, in other words Derek's whole pack, were more than enough for them. The only unanswered question was of the druid that was hell-bent on killing Decalion's pack, but that part held little interest and importance. Only the sacrifices and stopping them were of importance. It's up in the air if she would have answered that, though I doubt that. Druids, especially those acting as emissaries, more times than not, shared packs with the alphas of the packs they acted as guides to. So Morrill saying she couldn't help, all the while also helping indirectly, pointed at something akin to a druidic oath or a warped sense of loyalty. I'm 17 for crying out loud. He whined. He had been lucky enough in managing to convince Coach to let him sit out practice with a flimsy excuse made more believable since he rarely, if ever, skipped practice. Great. And now I have to double the work I put into my study. Are you sure he's not going to want to blow your head off? Shouldn't that be my question? While Tristan was having another bout of existential crisis and cursing the circumstances around his life, Allison and her best friend were pulling up to Allison's driveway. For the record, I'm not on board with this at all. Why did I allow you to drag me into this in the first place? Allison took in deep breaths to calm herself before turning the car off and alighting it, still jumpy despite this being everything she's ever wanted. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Malia said with a confident grin. It's not like this is the first time I'm visiting or something. Strolling in unbothered, Malia entered into the Argent's home as if she was still a welcomed friend and not the passive acquaintance based on conditions that she currently was. Hey sweetie, how was school? Crack. The glassware on Chris' hands broke apart and it took him everything not to reach to the cabinet an arm's length away and pull out the pistol in it. Allison. Chris called out to his daughter, who looked half-part embarrassed and apologetic. She answered by sending out a weak wave, quickly accompanied with a wince as she saw her mother coming down the stairs. Hello Mr. and Mrs. Argent. Malia greeted them. Oh, I was the one who told Allison that I wanted to come over. She clarified. Chris nodded, turning to his wife, and said. Don't worry, honey, I'll take it from here. Before turning back to Malia. And can I know what brings you here? The family of three, including the retreating mother, now all looked at Malia for her words, and what she said was so simple, hence why it made it even more hard to believe. I want you to teach me how to hunt and kill an alpha. Malia said. Chapter 145, Chapter 141. Faced with the completely left-sided question from Malia, Chris was left stunned for the first few seconds, and after that feeling faded away, his face went taut as a spike of anger flowed through his bloodstreams, and he had been about to lash out at her if not for Allison wedging herself between the two of them and forcing him to calm down. Come again. He gave Allison a hard stare before training his eyes back on Malia. Unfazed by Chris' inner simmering, Malia reiterated her exact words again, confirming to Chris that he had indeed not heard wrong. Before you get the wrong idea, I'm not asking you to give me hunting tips. I wouldn't even if you asked. Right. All I'm asking is how to go around it if I want to kill an alpha. Malia said. In case she didn't make it clear enough for the Argent Patriarch to understand, she further simplified. I want to kill Aiden. Chris looked between the two girls, his rising anger having greatly abated after claiming himself down, wondering what the hell the young teens of this generation were about without any appreciation for subtle boundaries. Granted, he wasn't as blindingly hostile to werewolves and the likes like he had been 6 months prior, but the reminder that he now dealt with supernatural creatures more passively than he's ever done made him feel weird. Looking at Malia and remembering what happened that night at the abandoned bank in her fight against the Alpha Twin, he could understand the grudge she held to some degree. But taking on an Alpha, that's a tall order, even for me. He raised his hands to stop the both of them from speaking out any protest. The reason for that isn't because I'm petty, but rather that hunting an Alpha is something only exceptional hunters with years of experience can do. He's right, Malia. Not just anyone can hunt an Alpha, even amongst the elder hunters, only a handful of them have single-handedly gone up against an Alpha, and it's never a direct confrontation. Allison added. If just anyone could hunt an Aloha, then they would never have been anything like a werewolf problem in the long history of hunters. So no tips or pointers. Chris' eyes twitched irritably at Malia's disappointed look, but the girl continued on just as easily with an unperturbed stride. Then what about what would work for me as a war coyote? At this, Chris looked at her as if she was an idiot. She definitely is, no doubt. You are talking about your advantage against someone who's better than you in everything you can do? How about you start taking this seriously? Willful teens are a special breed of children within a particular age bracket whose sole existence is to piss off every adult they come across. To Chris, Malia was a very good example, and he couldn't exactly fault her because it was a characteristic that a lot of young werewolves had, which made it very easy to kill them despite the stockpile of their innate abilities. Even if some of them were killers, it doesn't mean that they have ever experienced what it felt like to dangle on the edge of death, something he could clearly see in Malia's eyes. Do you think I came here to meet you of all people just to tell a tasteless joke? Malia snarled back. Guys, come on. It was going good for a few minutes there. Allison, acting as the neutral voice of reason, tried placating both sides. I don't think you understand. Chris said to Malia, who now looked a little confused at where he was reaching at. Whatever gave you the assumption that you could simply kill an Alpha? Indeed. What created this notion in recent times that Alphas were just bigger wolves that you could hunt down with adequate preparation, was something that Chris really wanted to know. Seeing their silence, Chris groaned and beckoned on both of them to follow. He led them to the practice room that was adjacent to their garage, where racks of guns and bows were openly showcased. You can't just hunt down an Alpha. It doesn't work like that, never did. His face was rigid as he explained, helping them do away with such a flawed mindset that would eventually get them killed. How do you guys do it then, even when you're very weak? Is it the weapons? Because I doubt discipline can get you that far. Malia laid bare her mind. To her, while the hunters had nifty tricks and rigid discipline, that shouldn't be enough to bridge the wide gap between both races. Instead of answering her, Chris looked at his daughter, and Allison supplemented his look by giving Malia the answer. It's because we never go on a hunt as a means of simply attacking werewolves. We win because all we are taught is to target a werewolf's weakness. Everything about a hunter's experience is centered on how efficiently he can damage a werewolf's weakness. It was that simple. Something so common that everyone, even the werewolves, is aware of it. After all, even if they know, it is almost impossible to cover up a natural weakness. So mountain ash, wolfsbane, cured silver, and mistletoe? Malia asked in disbelief. And discipline? Chris said with a sarcastic smirk. Tristan Hayes POV. Bam. Tristan exhaled slowly and opened his eyes, showing off his flickering iris that soon settled back to its normal color, only to find his hand halfway through the brick wall he had punched. Don't worry. It happens. A voice sounded from behind him, causing him to turn around to find Derek standing there with a knowing expression. You are getting better. I didn't hear you coming. Tristan idly noted, not at all bothered because it was something experienced werewolves, mostly Alphas, could do. Completely hiding their presence from other enhanced senses. Should I know why you're here? He asked, given how weird it was for Derek to approach him, which was something that only happened when he was caught in a bind. Not specifically, but Scott wanted to meet. Derek said as he took a step towards Tristan until he was right in his face, staring directly into his eyes. Are you having problems with your shift? Tristan shook his head. Nah. I just wanted to vent and ended up with, well, that. He said, pointing at the hole in the wall. I gotta go, I'm supposed to be taking it easy today. Leaving Derek, Tristan absent-mindedly went about the day and continued like that even after going home. The next day, the whole grade went on a field trip. A much appreciated change of routine for Tristan, as this excused him from practice and the occasional mingling with the other people he was somewhat acquainted with. Following behind the school bus in his car which accommodated himself, Boyd and Isaac, with Malia opting to ride with Allison and Lydia in the former's car. Isaac chose to ride with them because he had gotten close to Boyd in recent times because the latter had started hanging out with Erica for some time now, having gone out a few times. Isaac was also curious of how Tristan, who was the most socially recluse person he's ever met, managed to be friends with Boyd for this long. Everyone who paid even the tiniest attention to Tristan would know that Boyd was his only male friend. How are they talking lodgings? I'm not getting paired with Greenberg. Isaac spat out, disliking the idea of how Coach had arranged their sleeping arrangements. Luckily they quickly voted against the arrangements, and Coach, who couldn't be bothered by the reasons of hormonal teens, left them to their heart desires. I don't think they'll have a room with 3 beds, so you could square with us. You don't have a problem with that, do you, Tristan? Boyd asked the silent driver of their car. Don't care either way, as long as he isn't sharing a bed with me, Tristan said. And that he doesn't snore loudly. I don't even know how I'm supposed to respond to that. To be offended or stunned? Isaac stared speechlessly at the vampire teen, already used to how he spoke but never having spent over an hour with him in the same place. It's Tristan, just roll with it. Boyd chuckled. Anyone knows how the girls are doing? The drive is going to take more than a few hours. He pointed out, not forgetting the fact that they would likely get stuck in traffic a couple of times on this journey. They are doing all right. They are currently talking about fashion magazines, Tristan said, shocking Boyd and making Isaac gape wide at what Tristan just insinuated. How do you know that they are talking about fashion magazines? They are like 3 cars in front of us, Boyd asked, not minding Isaac's nervous chuckle. To his credit, Tristan paused for a brief moment at Boyd's question before shrugging nonchalantly and replied in an even tone. Because I can see Malia waving a fashion magazine at Lydia. Boyd's uncertainty rose higher and he looked out the window at Allison's car where the girls were, having problems even making out a moving silhouette from this distance. How can you tell? Good eyesight, Tristan said as if it was the most natural and obvious reason. And I saw Malia packing a bunch of magazines before we left the house. Oh. Oh. Chapter 146, Chapter 142. The ride ended up taking the whole day, and the night further annoyed the tired students as most of the motels they came across were either full or couldn't accommodate even a fraction of the students here, so they ended driving even farther until they came across this one motel tucked away in no man's land. Well, beggars can't be choosers. Still, this motel is kind of creepy, Isaac said, surveying the exterior of the motel with a grimace on his face, an expression shared by over half the students. The other half were too tired to complain. Glen Capri Motel. Facing the students, Coach held a bunch of keys in his hands as he addressed them. Listen up. The meet's been pushed till tomorrow. This is the closest motel with the most vacancies and the least amount of good judgment when it comes to accepting a bunch of degenerates like yourselves. You'll be pairing up, choose wisely. Each taking a key, the bunch of wrung-out teenagers filtered sluggishly into the motel. And I'll have no soul perversions perpetrated by you little deviants. Got that? Keep your dirty little hands to your dirty little selves. The students laughed at Coach's words, maybe because it was funny or ironic, who knows. Taking their key, Boyd and Tristan made their way to their assigned room. I don't like this place, Tristan suddenly said after they had barely even moved past the receptionist desk. Got a scare for haunted houses and ghosts? Boyd smirked in an attempt to tease, but Tristan merely shook his head. Kind of feels stuffy. I doubt I'll be able to get any good sleep, he said. Well, if you guys aren't going to sleep anytime soon, how about I come crash with you until lights out? Isaac proposed, obviously in no mood to go back to the room he shared with a fellow student. As long as we are not sharing a bed, knock yourself out, were Tristan's only words as he twisted the knob and entered the room. He had to flick the switch multiple times before the bulb lit up, making him almost growl his already piling up frustration at the motel. Stiff beds, creaky springs, infested cabinets, and a fan that doesn't work. Looks like your intuition was on point, Tristan. Boyd's words, filled with mirth, only poked at Tristan's bad side. Resigning himself to a bad night, he was about to crash before his phone rang with Malia's name popping up. Yet, he lazily drawled out, laying spread out on the bed. Sheesh, is your room that bad? Malia asked upon hearing how he sounded. While the one she was sharing with Allison had a few problems, she knew it had nothing on the one Tristan and Boyd were sharing just based on how he sounded. At least the fan works, Right. Tristan groaned even louder, earning him a few chuckles from Malia's side. If you guys aren't crashing anytime soon, how about you come over? Oh, and bring snacks too. Malia ended the call while Tristan remained in the same position, too lazy to even make an effort to roll over, talk less of pulling himself up and going over to the other side of the motel to Allison and Malia's room. Come on, let's go. It's better than just staying here and complaining about our room. Boyd said, having heard the invitation Malia had sent out. You can go over and I'll go get the snacks. Do you mind if I tag along? Isaac asked, his only option of company being either with Tristan and Boyd, going over to Scott and Styles, or checking up with Cora and Erica. Sure. Tristan agreed and stretched his hands towards Boyd, who pulled him off the bed. I'll go with Boyd to get the snacks while also checking up on Cora and Erica. Tristan watched as Boyd and Isaac went to get the snacks while he still stood by the door, half the mind to simply go back inside his room and mute his phone to further disturbances, but he shook his head when he deduced that Malia would definitely stomp over and drag him out of bed. Sighing for the umpteenth time today, he dragged himself and trudged towards Malia's room number. Of course everyone's passed out. He muttered as he noticed that everyone was inside their room and the majority of them were already dozing off. Stop. Please, don't kill me. Tristan stopped and looked around him with a sharp gaze as incoherent words filtered its way into his ears. The labored voice of a man under extreme panic, begging someone to spare his life. Listening on, he traced the direction of the sound with increased footsteps as the voice became more frantic. Seeing that he was out of time and the room that was about to have a permanent resident still a good distance away on the adjacent wing of the same floor, Tristan made an almost reckless choice that luckily wasn't so, as everyone was in their rooms, jumped off his floor and used his blood to latch onto the pillar on the adjacent floor and reeled himself in. Stow. Bam. He kicked the door in but froze in his next actions as the room was empty without any sign of life or anyone having been here for possibly months or even years. Every inch of the room was covered in cobwebs and thick layers of dust, yet no sign of a dying man. And yet he could still hear the man's crying plea ringing over and over in his ears. Trapped in the muddled prison of his mind, all Tristan could do was stay rooted to his spot as the screams in his head got increasingly louder and he started losing his consciousness of the outside world. Don't you think that's too much for a night's snack? We'll be the ones eating most of it in the end, you know. Isaac complained at the amount of snacks Boyd had purchased. Really? I don't think so. Boyd looked at the snacks in his hands and concluded that this was just about right. We won't have to worry about eating all of them if Erica and Cora decide to come along. Isaac smacked his head in disbelief. The girls we know probably won't be eating too much at night because they all have to watch their weight. Isaac ended up blurting out those words that took Boyd aside. The two of them stared at each other as if the other had suddenly grown another head. How did you even come to that? It wasn't wrong to say that Isaac had Boyd lost with his words. I might not have a girlfriend yet, but I know that much. Isaac rolled his eyes but then froze as from the edge of his vision he saw a refrigerator with chains wrapped around it. Isaac. Boyd shook Isaac upon noticing his weird and abrupt stillness. Yes, nothing. I'm fine. Isaac sputtered out in reflexive panic. Come on, let's go. That was weird. Boyd muttered, hurrying behind Isaac, who suddenly looked as if he was in a haste. Boyd, who was confused at the sudden change in Isaac's temperament, was blissfully unaware that the reason why Isaac was panicked was because of the throbbing in his fingers and the irritable itch in his mouth. He was shifting without his control, so he was trying to force it down so Boyd wouldn't find out, or end up dead. His eyes started itching as his vision started switching from his normal sight to one that lit up the night in different hues of color. HRRNG. Who knows if Tristan actually left for Malia's room? NNHGN. Isaac's breathing became labored as the seconds ticked by, the last string of his control slipping out of his grasp. Boyd had already noticed that Isaac was behaving weirder as they walked and was equally concerned, but before he could voice it, Isaac started speaking with muffled pained groans escaping his lips to Boyd's ears. Take the snacks and check if Tristan really left. Me, Erica and Cora will catch up with you in Malia's room, okay? Isaac said, practically forcing each syllable out of his mouth to prevent the roar that was building up in his lungs to be released. Hey man, something is up with you. Should I go get Coach? Boyd asked with growing concerns as Isaac was hunched over. Grr. I'll be fine. It's nothing bad. Go, I'll meet you there in a minute. Before Boyd could give a reply, Isaac was already running up the stairs, heading towards Erica's room clearly in pain. Boyd remained there for over 3 minutes walking in circles as he couldn't decide what to do, until he ultimately decided to go back to Tristan and ask if they knew what was up with Isaac. Isaac couldn't even get to Erica's room before he fell to the ground with a pale shivering countenance as if he was hypothermic, sweating profusely even as tears ran down his eyes. And no. I won't disobey you again. He started sobbing silently. Please, let me out. Chapter 147, Chapter 143. In Malia and Allison's room. Malia put the phone down after talking to Tristan and inviting him and Boyd over, Isaac too if he wanted to come with. And here I thought our room was one of the worst ones. Allison mused. Tristan might not have said any word during the call but his groan said the whole story. Let me take a quick shower before they arrive. Hopefully there's nothing wrong with the faucet. It's a little slow, but we can manage for a night. Allison informed after getting into the bath. The lights in their room kept flickering on and off and the fan made croaking noises as it spun around. Overall it was manageable. Malia closed her eyes and let the discordant sounds of her surroundings play like a background tempo that made her relax to the point that she almost fell asleep. She only opened her eyes when she heard Allison coming out of the bath and drying her hair. They are not here yet? Allison asked, seeing that almost 10 minutes has gone by since she entered the bathroom. Are you taking a shower now? Malia shook her head. I'll probably take one around 12, it helps me relax even better that way. Allison shrugged and focused on drying her hair and turned around a minute later to ask Malia to call Tristan to check if they were held up, but all she found was Malia sleeping peacefully. She was probably tired the entire time and didn't even know it. Allison muttered to herself with a small smile. Malia had driven them all the way here after Allison had complained about her wrist during their second stop. For such a headstrong girl, she was pretty considerate in her own weird way, one that was hardly noticeable, and she hardly ever complained on important things. She picked up her phone and tried dialing Tristan but he didn't pick up. Knowing Tristan the way she did, she guessed that he either remained behind and muted his phone or he just didn't want to pick up. She was about to call Boyd, maybe cancel if they were still in their room since Malia had fallen asleep, but her hands tapping against her screen froze as she heard a small, almost silent, growl from behind her. Turning around, confusion and shock danced around her face and painted a telling expression on her face. Malia, what the hell are you doing? She shouted with a restrained voice and took a reflexive step back when Malia got on all fours, cold azure blue staring directly at her soul. One hand front. One foot back. Just like a natural predator, Malia stalked her prey silently and slowly, and like every cornered prey, Allison took a step back as she saw the look on Malia's eyes. She was utterly confused by the current predicament she found herself in. Malia, knock it out. She pleaded softly, but the bare reaction Malia showed told her that her words were meaningless. Too focused on Malia and trying to calm down the mental turbulence in her head, she didn't notice when she backed herself into a narrow spot between the bed and the wall. The moment the jolt shook her focus, Malia pounced on her, her fangs aimed straight at Allison's jugular. A teenage girl she was, and utterly confused at the bizarre situation she suddenly found herself in, but she wasn't entirely helpless. Was it luck or adrenaline that enabled her to reach for the pillow and put it in front of Malia's mouth, narrowly preventing the bite that would have killed her in moments? She dove across the bed and rolled towards her bag. With a calm breath and steady deft hands, she zipped open the underside of her bag and pulled out 2 ring daggers and 3 black pebbles. Just as immediately as her hands touched them, she threw 2 towards Malia, who was a moment away from lunging at her, and they exploded to surround her in a dark mist that reduced the bloodthirsty feral war coyote into a heaving fit. Not wasting a moment at the dawn of an opening, she threw one or her daggers at Malia, sinking the cold black blade into her thigh that finally made Malia release a human sound instead of a bestial growl. Malia gasped as if she finally managed to get air after almost drowning in a freezing pond. What? Huff huff, what happened? She asked anxiously, her panic increasing as Allison kept silent and just watched her every movement with extreme scrutiny. Moving from Allison, she frantically turned around in hopes of something explaining what was happening, only for a bomb to go off in her head, and she saw the state of the room, the bruise on Allison's left arm, the ripped pillow, and then the source of her pain, the dagger in her thigh. "Hey Allison! I swear, that wasn't me." Her voice almost cracked as she forced those words out after what she figured she had almost done. To Allison no less. She had almost killed her best friend. Seeing how close Malia's expression was to breaking, Allison sighed in relief that Malia was finally back to her senses. "Malia, it's all right." "Allison, I just tried to kill you." "How is that all right?" Malia's nerves were still rattled, so she ended up shouting louder than she had meant to. Allison, however, shook her head. Luckily, I managed to get you back before you stopped stalking me. And that had been Allison's saving grace, the fact that Malia was still accessing the prey, her, to judge its strength. Which was why she attacked the split second when Allison lost her focus. What happened, Malia? One moment you were sleeping and the next you were trying to kill me. Malia shook her head but then froze as she could remember fully well what had happened, what she was doing. I was hunting in the woods, like I used to when I was a child. I couldn't get a clear view of the animal, but I knew it was one that frequently barges into my territory to attack me, so I decided to hunt it down instead. What she had experienced was more graphic than that. Back to when she was still stuck in her Coyote 4, before Tristan, the crash site where her sister and mother died was frequented by scavenging animals and she had to fight tooth and nail with those animals, sometimes a group of them, not to desecrate the gravesite of her family. Oh my God! Allison exclaimed. She hurriedly dialed Tristan's number but the call wasn't picked up, so she dialed Erica, the same result. Malia, what if you're not the only one? There are 4 other werewolves and a vampire in this motel. She didn't need to finish the sentence as Malia had already yanked out the blade in her thigh with a hiss before pulling herself up. What the fuck? Does that mean we're being targeted or something is seriously wrong with this motel? Malia limped for a bit before she got back her balanced footing. Let's go. Allison. What the hell is wrong with this place? Their door was swung open by a frazzled Lydia who appeared to be on the verge of hysteria. What the hell happened here? Why is there a bloody dagger lying around, and what's up with the smoke? Lydia, we don't have the time to explain but we believe something is wrong with. Someone please listen to me. Lydia's frenzied shout surprised them but they did remain silent to let her speak. I can hear them. The voices. I think someone is going to die. Just this experience alone had made it abundantly clear that wasn't suitable for this kind of life. Who would be when they suddenly start hearing the voices of dead people and the crying regrets of the departed? Malia needed no other prompts before she dashed out of the room and headed straight for Tristan's room. Allison and Lydia quickly followed after her but they couldn't catch up with her no matter how fast they pushed their legs. They came across Styles on their way who said Scott suddenly started behaving very strange. A hasty explanation from Allison as they ran towards Tristan's room brought Styles up to date. You left Scott alone but Tristan is with Isaac and Boyd. Styles' face paled as Allison pointed that fact out. The result was something no one wanted to see. As for Malia, she felt her fingers and joints suddenly becoming cold as she arrived at where Tristan's scent was concentrated. Despite her blaring instincts warning her of the danger inside the room, Malia ignored it without hesitation and entered the room and saw Tristan just standing there with dull eyes, doing absolutely nothing. The others arrived and stared at Malia who was shaking Tristan who remained still as if frozen. Tristan, come on. Snap out of it. She shouted, slapping and hitting him did nothing so she clawed at his flesh to bolt him out of his trance with pain but still he remained unmoving. I can hear them. Lydia suddenly said. And I think he can hear them too. Chapter 148, Chapter 144. With Tristan's unresponsive state, the 4 of them stood there unsure of what to do when nothing was working. Even Malia forcefully feeding him her blood did nothing. Lydia was also confused because what she had said about Tristan hearing the voices of the dead was something that she had unknowingly blurted out without even realizing it. Could it be that he can really hear them? The reason that fueled this thought of hers was the fact that the voices in this particular room were more loud and clear than the other voices she heard. Allison, you and Styles go check if you can find Isaac and Boyd. Malia and I will watch over Tristan, and whatever this is. They had hardly left when another footstep arrived at the door. Boyd looked super confused at seeing them here instead of the girls' room. What are you guys doing here? I went to your room and it was EMP, Ty. Now Boyd was sure that something was going on when he saw the troubled faces of Styles and Allison. Not that the splatters of blood on and around Tristan were subtle. What the fuck is happening here, and why is Tristan looking like a mannequin? The situation was already delicate with them having no idea on how to snap Tristan out of his daze, and also the 4 werewolves that were still unaccounted for. The urgency of the current inexplicable scenario they found themselves in didn't give them the luxury to care about shattering Boyd's worldview. Where's Isaac? Styles asked impatiently. He went to get Erica and Cora from their rooms. Boyd replied despite his surging confusion, and told them all he knew. Also Isaac was acting somewhat weird, like he was in pain or something. He didn't say what, only telling me he'd catch up with us later. Hearing him, Styles and Allison both rushed out of the room and made their way towards the girls' room. Boyd looked confused for a brief moment before making up his mind and followed them. He was worried about what was happening to Tristan, but Malia and Lydia were there with him. After they left, Malia turned to Lydia and asked if she had any idea on what was wrong with him, given her rather obscure nature as a banshee. "I'm sorry, but I'm just as lost as you are," she said. "What are the voices saying?" "Hey! The voices you hear," Malia repeated. "What are they saying?" Lydia looked at Malia, disbelieving what Malia just asked her. Here she was trying to ignore the voices and hopefully block them out, and Malia turned around and asked her to listen to it. "You really are my living bane," she grumbled, but acquiesced the earnest request. It didn't take long before she fell into a trance of her own as the events of the past that occurred in this motel were slowly unraveled to her. A couple of seconds later and she left her trance with a gasp, shock traveling through her body as she witnessed the suicides that had taken place in this. "Suicides?" she mumbled. "They all killed themselves." Malia frowned, almost wanting to say something, but it was at that point that Tristan stirred. It was a little fluttering of his eyelids that she almost missed. Hope welling up in her heart, she instinctively wanted to call out to him, but then she froze. The coldness in her joints she felt when she first entered the room washed over her, overwhelmingly that it ceased all her movements for a brief moment. A brief moment where thin needle-like strands of solidified blood all found their sharp points centimeters away from her and Lydia's neck. While the two girls stood rooted to one spot, fearing the dozens of blood needles will pierce them should they move, Tristan, who currently looked like a human porcupine, finally started waking up. The endless cacophony of screams and pleading finally started receding and his basic senses started coming back. His sight, hearing, smell, taste, and sensation came back, and he found himself blinking when his sight came back. The once empty room where the ghostly voices tried assaulting his mind to make him kill himself was no longer empty, as it now had Malia and Lydia at a literal gunpoint, his version of it at the very least. He could taste Malia's blood in his mouth, and the injuries on his body, also inflicted by her, were all covered up in an instant. "She tried waking me up." The needles of blood lost their strength and wobbled back into his body, much to the relief of the two girls. "I don't like this place." He meant it before and doubly so now. If it were someone else, human or supernatural, without a very solid mental fortitude, then they would have been driven mad by the endless voices and would have looked for a way to kill themselves. He had been terribly anxious when he had lost himself, but after only hearing the screaming, begging and endless curses being hurled inside his head, he figured he had no need to worry and instead focused on trying to get back control of his body. A dark dream of baleful curses was not something that would terrify him to death. There were things that could. He had already experienced one, and this wasn't anywhere near the terror he felt from a dream of nothing but flowing blood. "What happened to you?" Lydia asked. Tristan briefly explained how he got to his current situation and listened to what the two girls had to say. "So this is actually a haunted house with 199 suicidal spirits? This is the most impressive haunted house backstory I've ever heard." Only his morbid sentiment and misconstrued appreciation of the horror building wasn't shared by the two girls. "You said the others are trying to kill themselves?" he asked, and they nodded, almost letting out a groan knowing what was coming next. "I wonder whose idea it was to have me attend this meeting," he grumbled to himself. "Allison, Styles, and Boyd. Anyway, they are going to be mauled to death by angry suicidal werewolves. Wait." Before they could fully let out those words, Tristan had already flung himself off the balcony straight towards the room at the end of building. The first person he saw was Isaac, who looked pale and was struggling to hold back a fully shifted Erica. It turns out that Isaac had slashed his own wrists and was stopping himself from healing due to mental torture he was suffering during the time as he slowly bled to his death. Which was what would have happened if Allison and Styles arrived any late. The easiest thing would be to force them into submission with a roar, but that would wake up the whole student body in the motel. With no need for any inane exchange of words, he backstepped at the lousy grab Erica had attempted and grabbed her by the neck as she stumbled forward. Holding Erica by her neck, his first thought was to injure her with his claws or fangs and snap her out of whatever suicidal reverie she was in, but an instinctual feeling came over him and he went along with it. Staring at Erica, who was flailing and gasping in his grasp, his instincts took over and he commanded her. "Stop." At his words, the red iris of his eyes widened even more, that his black pupil shrunk to the size of a black dot, with his red eyes shining even brighter for a moment before it returned to its original intensity. Erica, the recipient of Tristan's stare, stiffened in his grasp and immediately stopped her flailing and gasping, even going far as to hold her breath, all the while shivering in fear. Seeing that she was back to her senses, Tristan nodded at the pleasant discovery, and released her. As for Cora, Allison used her last smoke pebble to destabilize her senses for Styles and Boyd to hold her down for her trusty dagger to do its work. Tristan raised his hand at Boyd, who was about to say something, and turned back to the direction he smelt leaking gasoline. There Scott was in the middle of the road, bathed in gasoline and standing on a leaking puddle of an unlit flare in his hands. What the hell does McCall think he's doing? Were the mental tortures he experienced so great that he wanted to end it with a blazing exit? The answer to that question is something Tristan would never know, as he hardly knew what ran inside the heads of high school teens other than S*X and party. Scott slowly turned to face their direction, fear, guilt, and resignation wafting off him to Tristan's nose. Tristan was already fed up with the entire experience, from the journey to this haunted house of a motel, that he paid no attention to the gasp of horror and shock from the others behind him as they started noticing Scott. In an instant he was gone, and in another Scott slumped down unceremoniously as Tristan knocked him out and threw the flare a good distance away from them. Looking back at Allison and Co., he pointed at the gasoline puddle and the truck Scott vandalized. "Clean this up." No one said anything as they watched him go back to his room to get some sleep. Chapter 149, Chapter 145. "So, are we going to talk about it?" Tristan ignored the question throughout the entire ride on their way back to Beacon Hills. It wasn't enough that he didn't get enough sleep, but Boyd also found out about the supernatural. If he was being perfectly honest, his first thought upon waking up was to see if he could compel Boyd to forget everything that happened the previous night, but given that he had no idea how effective they would be in regards to commanding someone to forget a memory held him back. That and maybe the slightest bit of sentimentality he had. "Keep on disturbing me, Boyd, and I'll make sure you can't talk for the rest of the journey," Tristan warned, but apparently Boyd thought he was just joking. And unfortunately for Tristan, he was too tired to compel Boyd, so his oblivious best friend carried on with pestering him until they got back. Tristan was all too eager to kick him out of the car. "I think I'll drop off here too." Isaac, who had been silent since the beginning, suddenly spoke out as Boyd came down. It was very easy to forget just what type of creature Tristan was, especially now that he was an alpha, since he didn't go about shifting every other Tuesday night. "Better," Tristan said as the two of them came down, not even wasting another second for yes before shifting gears and speed towards his home. Boyd finding out about the supernatural world wasn't such a good thing to Tristan, as that meant he could likely be another casualty in the never-ending fights and squabbles in Beacon Hills. As for the traumatic events and mental torture of the haunted motel, Tristan forgot about it as soon as they left the damned place. Since the girls were at Allison's place, Tristan had prime time to catch up on the sleep he was cheated on at the motel. Before he fell asleep, he felt his phone vibrate as a text came through that said that their chemistry teacher, Mr. Harris, was missing. He didn't bother with checking who sent the text as he turned off his phone to prevent any further disturbance. "Can't Beacon Hills just stay normal for 24 hours? He muttered drowsily as sleep crept over him. Arriving at school the next day, Tristan went to the guidance counselor office to speak with Ms. Morrill, only to be told that she was absent. "Convenient. Looking for someone?" Malia asked, cutting out from a corner to come across Tristan. "Yes. I wanted to meet up with the therapist druid," he said, referring to Marin Morrill. The two of them walked back to class since none of them had anything else better to do. Tristan was avoiding Boyd because of how annoying his best friend suddenly became. Honestly, he would have preferred it if Boyd remained ignorant. "Not hanging out with Allison and Lydia today?" he idly asked, not at all caring but just to make idle conversation. Malia shook her head. "I've been spending the last few days in their company. I need a break from all the girl power they keep oozing out." The bell rang soon after, signaling an end to their chat, with a crowd of students filtering into the class followed by their new literature teacher, Ms. Jennifer Blake. "Okay guys, settle in and silence the chatter," she said, and brought out a small textbook. "Now who'll take us up on where we stopped in our last class?" Man, you're still not ignoring me, are you?" Boyd shouted in indignation as Tristan silently walked past him and got himself into their training gear. "That's a dick move, Tristan." Tristan stopped and turned to look at Boyd for a few seconds before sighing in resignation. "As long as you don't ask me what it's like to be a vampire." Boyd looked betrayed at Tristan's words but acquiesced with Tristan's request with a wry smile. "Fair. In fact, don't ask me anything about supernaturals in general," Tristan reiterated, and Boyd could only groan in agreement. As Tristan's longest friend, Boyd understood what Tristan wanted to convey with these requests of his, especially his words in their car ride back home. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Tristan wasn't the least bit happy with Boyd's inclusion to their circle, so they could only come to a compromise. "I hear you, man," Boyd said as he put on his helmet. "For a change of topic, did you hear that Mr. Harris is missing?" Tristan nodded. "Heard, but uninterested." As they got into the field, a certain rhythmic beating entered Tristan's ears and completely subverted his focus towards the source of the beating thump. Looking around the field, Tristan's eyes scanned everyone and soon he saw the source of the sound beating in his ear. The Alphas. Took a lion, flanked by the twins, standing at the edge of the field. He met his gaze with them and they calmly returned it with Lion even smiling a little. "It starts now, Tristan. I hope you're ready." He heard Lion's words in his ears and that caused goosebumps to wash over his body. He saw them leaving and made no effort to stop them as there was nothing he could do, especially since it was in the middle of the day. "Tristan, you there?" Boyd nudged his sides, jolting him back to the present world. "The popular story says it's a serial killer, but people aren't buying it. The death tolls have been absurdly high just this year alone. I know what you're trying to get me to say, but I'm not saying it. As for what I think serial killer is the closest thing to being true," Tristan said, not paying any mind to Boyd as he jogged into the field. Up in the stands, Malia watched as Boyd caught up with Tristan at the same time that Isaac made his way towards them. She was also unaware of Lion and the twins' presence at the edge of the field just moments ago, which can be said to be a good thing as no one knew what she might have done. Allison and Lydia were out there digging out clues along with Scott and Styles, but she declined from coming along with them because she knew she wouldn't add any significant input. They had a hunter and a werewolf to sniff out whatever they were looking for and people like Styles and Lydia to bookworm their way through most of the things they might come across. She watched as the boys played their lacrosse with a lost expression cast across her face. "I'm bored." She chuckled softly as she saw Tristan ignoring Boyd anytime he asked anything supernatural related, causing the boy to turn to Isaac, who was more than welcome to tell him most of the things he knew about their world. "Things are changing too fast," she noted as she watched the new dynamic between Tristan and his friend. After practice, Tristan, Boyd, and Malia sat together, with no other inclusion, on the stairs as Malia answered some of the questions Boyd had. "It's not like I want to try and fit my way into your world, I don't doubt it'll be cool, but I'm just curious. Learning the least I can about you guys is something that genuinely fascinates me. As long as you know when to stop being inquisitive." Tristan isn't lying by saying that it'll be best if you remain ignorant, Malia warned lightly. Tristan, who had been idly listening to their conversation, furrowed his brows as he felt himself violently reacting to something. "Trist?" Malia asked upon noticing his peculiar expression. "Grrrrrrrrrll." The young vampire's eyes turned red as he growled dangerously while looking around them. Using his blood sense, he sensed every presence around him and honed in on the one that felt very weird to him, and his head whipped in that direction behind him. He stared at Boyd, much to the boy's confusion and creeping panic, but before he could ask Tristan why he was being stared at like that, he grasped his chest as breathing suddenly felt hard. "Ugh! Nnrgh! Argh!" He groaned in pain as breaths felt heavy while also being assaulted with an unforgiving stomach ache. "Boyd!" Despite his sudden inexplicable aversion to Boyd, he supported the boy from falling over in pain and took that chance to get a read on his blood flow. "What's up with him all of a sudden?" Malia asked anxiously. Tristan's brows twisted in a frown. "It's something inside him. It's causing a very strange allergic reaction in his body. Poison. Some kind, yet. All I know is that it's not doing me any favors," he said and drew Boyd up to his feet and supported his balance with one of his hands over his shoulders. "Come on, let's get him to a hospital." Chapter 150, Chapter 146. Boyd's situation was a little bit tricky and the most Tristan could do was help with his pain. He wanted to give him his blood to see how it might help alleviate Boyd's condition, but something told him that doing that would only make it worse. The sudden aversion he felt towards Boyd wasn't just a psychological thing, because even touching Boyd made him feel like he was about to throw up. Whatever was in Boyd was something that he was very averse to, and given how he didn't sense anything wrong until moments before it started, he doubted it was a simple coincidental occurrence. Malia pulled up to the driveway of Beacon Hills Memorial Hospital while Tristan helped him out of the car. "What's wrong with him?" A familiar nurse rushed towards them before they even made it near the receptionist desk. "I don't know. I think poison of some kind." The pain was abrupt. Tristan explained to a woman he somehow recognized as Melissa McCall, Scott's mother, during one of his earlier lacrosse games. NNRGHHH. Boyd groaned in pain, overwhelming pain, that arrested some of his nerve functions. Come on, let's get him into a room and give him a pre-op. She hardly had finished her words when Boyd jerked to the side and opened his mouth to vomit his innards. Tristan flinched as Boyd threw up, not because he threw up but because the few drops of Boyd's vomit that made contact with his skin immediately caused it to sizzle. Not just Tristan, but Malia and Melissa, who also saw that, looked between the two boys before the experienced nurse looked between the young couple and nodded. I need a stretcher. Very fast, Boyd was taken to a ward where Melissa began administering to him, and even without possessing any expertise, they could tell that his situation was getting worse. Tristan internally was floored when he saw that what Boyd vomited was mistletoe, one of his major weaknesses, and said thing was still flowing through his veins. He's having trouble breathing. Tristan notified Melissa, who paused to verify Tristan's words and gave a grim nod. Don't worry, your friend is not going to die, Melissa said, trying to console the concerned boy and girl who were visibly worried for their friend. Here. Melissa picked up a long syringe, visibly frightened and slightly trembling because why won't she? Especially when Tristan's red eyes were boring into Boyd's chest that was heaving forcefully due to his lack of air. Hold him down. It was unclear if the one she meant was Boyd or Tristan, but Malia quickly did what she said and held Boyd down for Melissa to stab the syringe into an area of his chest to let air escape his lungs. Malia turned to Tristan, wondering if something made him lose his composure. Trist, is something wrong? Shaking his head lightly, the red glow of his eyes faded to their normal color. This wasn't a coincidence, he said without doubt. Gee guys. Boyd groaned and struggled to get a clear view of the both of their faces with how foggy his vision was. I feel like shit. Rest for now, we'll be back to check on you. Tristan patted his shoulders and Boyd slumped into a slumber. Thank you, and I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. He apologized to Melissa, who nodded with a relieved smile. When they left Boyd's ward, they saw that the hospital was steadily being crowded with patients, but something else caught Tristan's notice. Can you feel it? He asked Malia beside him, but no matter how she tried, other than an incoming storm, she couldn't get a feel of what he was sensing. It's the same feeling I got when those crows attacked the school on the first day. Something is happening. The two of them ran outside the hospital, ignoring Scott and Styles, who were going inside, and stood in the middle of the driveway with Malia patiently waiting for Tristan to sniff out a supernatural trail. This way. Getting the feeling of the general direction, Tristan ran towards it with Malia following right behind. By now the sky was already dark, and because of the storm that had already started pouring down in some areas, a long traffic line streaked across both the expressway and the main roads. They slowed down their speed considerably since this part of traffic was heavily congested, and using any of their supernatural abilities will result in hundreds of eyewitnesses. Got it! Tristan shouted as he finally got a precise tell, and when they rushed towards one of the cars stuck in traffic, it turned out that it was empty. It's an empty car, Trist. Malia deadpanned at Tristan, eyes raised and waiting for an explanation. Don't tell me you just had the both of us run halfway through town for an empty car. Tristan, however, shrugged. He only followed his instincts, not like he had anything concrete in mind. Probably someone was just kidnapped. He rolled his eyes at Malia and felt the temperature of the trunk. Hearing someone was kidnapped, everything clicked in place inside Malia's head. A sacrifice, she said. Knocking on the window of another car, Tristan kindly asked them if they saw anything weird with the empty car or when the owner left it, but they all shook their heads. Someone's already put a call to the sheriff's office, let's go. Where to? The Argents. Hey. Tristan was bothered, greatly so, Malia noticed. Ever since Boyd's episode a few hours ago, she could feel that he was barely keeping his inner voices on a thin leash because of what happened to Boyd. They had been making their way towards the Argent house when Malia caught Chris sent near the hospital and told Tristan, making them cut a detour to Argent Patriarch instead. When they arrived at his location, he was about to get into his car, but sensing their presence he pulled out a gun and pointed it at them, only to find that both his hand and his gun was covered in crystalline blood. Mind explaining the meaning of this? He spoke calmly as he acknowledged the presence of the two teens. It was Tristan who spoke first. Mistletoe. My friend got poisoned by it. Chris raised his brows at what was practically an accusation. And you think that what? That I did it. Surprisingly, Tristan shook his head, choosing to explain a bit further. I want to know why Boyd was targeted, and why mistletoe. Chris sighed and turned to close his car's door, but realized that one of his hands was still trapped in an encase of blood. Do you mind? The crystalline blood cracked and dissolved into blood that flowed back into Tristan's body. "Tell me what happened to Boyd." They briefly narrated what had happened, and from the short story and a little background context, Chris couldn't find a solid connection between them except for Boyd being a sacrifice. "Well, other than that, the only thing I can think of is that someone is trying to send you a message," Chris theorized. "So you think the Dark Druid is behind Boyd's attack and that they are trying to warn me?" Malia asked. This was one of the conclusions that Tristan originally came to, but he needed an educated point of view before acting on impulse. Chris sighed, massaging his thick beards, almost wishing he had a light right about now. "I don't know. Those are just based on my own thoughts. It could mean a lot of different things." "Mr. Argent, do you know how the sacrifices are carried out?" Malia asked tentatively. "Virgins, warriors, healers, philosophers, and guardians," Chris supplied. He did not prove difficult when it came to the two teens before them, because though he thought of one as an idiot, the both of them were highly competent, at least when fighting is concerned. "What of Deucalion?" Tristan was rightfully curious, because out of everybody involved in this quagmire, Deucalion's pack was the only one that nobody had any idea of what they were up to. And then there was the little heads up during practice today. "I've been tracking their presence and actions, and it's not been forthcoming with any clue." "I see," Tristan muttered. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Argent." He and Malia turned to leave, but this time Chris called out to them and seemed a bit reluctant to speak words that were clearly in his mouth. "Be careful, kids," he ended up saying, releasing a relaxed breath. Malia and Tristan nodded. The next moment they were gone. Neither Malia nor Tristan really believed that Boyd was used as a sacrifice, because it would have been way easier and effortless to just kidnap him after he got home. "Do you want us to try hunting the Dark Druid?" Tristan squeezed his lips and didn't immediately answer, weighing the importance and impact of any choice he made at this crossroad, before softly shaking his head. "Not actively. But should we find them? Of course we're killing them. That much is pretty obvious." She interjected and happily helped him complete his sentence.
Thanks for listening.